afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Camille Robinson-Regis. I'm the chairman of this joint select committee that has been established by the Parliament to deal with the Tobago Autonomy Bill. I would start by asking the members of the committee to introduce themselves. So I will start with Member De Freitas.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nigel De Freitas, member.
Good afternoon, everyone. Saddam Hussein, member.
Good afternoon, everyone. Foster Cummings, member.
Yes, good afternoon. Dineshwar Mahavir, independent senator, member.
Good afternoon. Clarence Rambarat, member.
Rudranath Narsingh, good afternoon, all member.
Stephen Crease, member.
We're just introducing ourselves.
Good afternoon, Shamfa Kajo, member.
Thank you very much, members. We also have officers from the Office of the Attorney General and from the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel. We have the secretariat that is provided by the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And I really want to thank you very much for coming out and to welcome you to this opportunity for us to discuss the bill that is before us and for this opportunity for enhancing our democracy as a country. I would like to start off by indicating that the Constitution Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill 2018 aims to amend the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and to repeal the Tobago House of Assembly Act, Chapter 2503. On Friday, March 9th, 2018, the Prime Minister, the Honorable Dr. Keith Rowley, introduced the bill in the House of Representatives. The bill seeks to make a number of amendments to the Constitution in order to accord self-government to Tobago. The history of the bill is well known, having gone through a certain number of iterations through various meetings held in Tobago, in the main, and in Trinidad. And as a bill, it is a bill that is before us that amends the Constitution, as I said, in order to accord self-government to Tobago. The right of the people of Tobago to determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. It also seeks to give equal status between Trinidad and Tobago. It also seeks to establish the Tobago legislature with the power to make laws for the peace, order, and good government of Tobago with all matters except those which are within the purview specifically stated of the central government. The bill will establish a Tobago Executive Council, a Tobago Island government, and Tobago matters are to be aired in the cabinet meetings by the Chief Secretary upon meeting with the Prime Minister. The bill also seeks to ensure that in the event that the President is to exercise her function under the Constitution or any other law, she must do so under the advice of the Cabinet, under the advice of a minister acting under the authority of the Cabinet, as well as the Tobago Executive Council or Secretary acting under the authority of the Council. The bill also seeks to establish a Tobago Service Commission, and the legislature that I described before will consist of the President, the House of Assembly, and the People's House. The House of Assembly and the People's House will regulate their own procedure and determine their own standing orders. The House of Assembly, it is intended, will consist of 15 assemblymen who are elected members, and 4 councillors and a presiding officer. The People's House, it is intended, will consist of 13 members who shall be elected from among the 7 parishes within Tobago and 6 persons from the 6 core sectors of the island. The Executive Council will consist of a Chief Secretary, a Deputy Chief Secretary, and others appointed on the advice of the Chief Secretary. There is also the intention to establish a Fiscal Review Commission to recommend the sums that the Parliament will give to Tobago for each financial year and establish also a mechanism for revenue sharing between the islands of Trinidad and Tobago. In the main, the Parliament shall appropriate 8% of the total budget in each financial year for the use of the House of Assembly, and there will also be established a Tobago Fund, which will consist of the monies appropriated by Parliament for the use of the House of Assembly and any other monies that the House of Assembly collects, borrows, or is granted. The House of Assembly will retain monies appropriated by the Parliament to that Tobago Fund, which remain unexpended at the end of the financial year. The Tobago Executive Council, it is intended, will have the power to borrow locally and internationally. And the Tobago Executive Council will also have the power to invest subject to certain qualifications. The Tobago Legislature shall approve financial rules which are necessary for its proper financial management, and the powers of the Tobago Legislature and the Tobago Executive Council will have effect only in Tobago. These are essentially the main aspects of the bill that we are here to discuss. Our intention today is to hear from you what your concerns or views are as it relates to the bill. As I said, we have officers here from the Office of the Attorney General, from the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, and the members of the committee are here to dialogue with you to make sure that at the end of the day we come to the Parliament with the best way forward for the people of Tobago and for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So the floor is now open, and I see we have 2 people who have come forward already.
A pleasant good afternoon to the members of the committee, to my fellow Tobagonians gathered here. My name is Anselm Richards. I hail from Belgarden in Tobago.
Mr. Richards, do you represent any organization or?
I represent Tobago, Madam Chair.
Okay.
And I'm so happy to do that. And permit me to start by expressing my concern about the timing and the time and day of this meeting. And you see how I'm attired. I am straight from worship. And I hope I will bring some kind of spiritual bearing on the committee in its deliberation today. Because if we understand the cultural history of Tobago, we know that Sunday and our religious observations are very important to us as a people. And I think it is important for us to underscore that today and the time, or more importantly, the time. And I would like to think that the members from Tobago would have brought that kind of bearing to the members of the committee, that 1 o'clock on a Sunday is really in the center of people's worship in Tobago. Just wanted to note that. I will start by saying that my review and probing of the bill have brought me to the conclusion that this bill should be rejected by the people of Tobago for a number of reasons. For a number of reasons. The bill is pregnant with inconsistency. A number of inconsistencies are resident in this bill. For instance, this bill does not provide a clear and precise definition of Tobago. 2, this bill does not speak to what constitutes internal self-government in its current incarnation. Notwithstanding that we would have had this issue discussed in 1976-77 in the National Parliament, but this legislation comes to us without a clear definition, even in the explanatory notes of what is internal self-government, or what the drafters see or conceptualize as internal self-government. And to me, that is a fatal flaw of the bill. In addition, some of the provisions of the bill are anti-democratic, in that there is a provision in this bill that speaks to a fiscal review commission that will determine the allocation for the people of Tobago by advising the Parliament on same. I don't think any modern arrangement for the governance of any part of Trinidad and Tobago should speak to any entity like this, which is a non-elected entity that will be empowered to determine how the people of Tobago will be funded, without any reference to our elected representative of our island government. And I think that this bill does not, in its current construct, speaks anything close to internal self-government to the people of Tobago. Another dangerous proposition of this bill is the attempt to institutionalize in the Constitution the Tobago House Assembly Bill. And let me just explain what I mean by this. 1, if we go with this bill and this bill becomes law, it means, therefore, the Assembly will not be able to change the governance structure that is prescribed for Tobago in this legislation, unless it goes back to the National Parliament to have the constitutional amended. And with the provision that these provisions are entrenched in certain aspects, makes it a very difficult pill for Tobagonians to swallow. So that's one of the problems with this bill. I think the bill is over-prescribing. I will want to suggest and think that we deal with the fundamental constitutional amendment that is necessary to afford the people of Tobago their right to self-determination within the context of self-governance, internal self-government, digging under the surface of the provision and looking at the functional form of government, and speaking to, mainly, 1, what is the legislative authority that Tobago needs in the context of the government of Trinidad and Tobago for us to realize internal self-government, and what amendment ought to be made to the Constitution, placing restriction on the central government for those matters that Tobago will be fully constitutionally responsible for. 2, what is the executive authority that goes with those legislative authority? And therefore, how do we break the monopoly that the central government has in the context of Section 75 of the Constitution, and placing the necessary restriction or limitation on the central government in terms of its executive function in Tobago relating to the matters that Tobago and the Tobago Island government would be responsible for. The third point, or the third pillar for me, should speak to a clear and precise definition of Tobago in terms of its physical space, its marine space. The other point I will submit is that we have a clear arrangement for the revenue sharing, not the Fiscal Review Commission that is referenced in this bill, but there is a clear and workable mechanism for Tobago to be adequately funded, and the operation in Tobago to be adequately funded. The fourth point I will I will submit is that within that arrangement, there should be a constitutional provision for Tobago to have some kind of constitutional connection to issues that are going to impact the government of Tobago and the government of Trinidad. That arrangement should speak to some issue of an intergovernmental arrangement. How do we resolve those matters that are common to Tobago and Trinidad and Tobago? There must be a provision for that because we have a long history. And therefore, there must be some mechanism built into the Constitution that speaks to how those matters will be resolved. Matters will affect Tobago and they will affect Trinidad, whether Tobago has to give its concurrence on those matters for them to go forward. For instance, we have the recent experience with the Sea Bridge, and we have a boat that was purchased and it is on its way for the longest while. I don't know if Tobago have approved or is satisfied with that boat, but a matter like that comes readily to mind that the Tobago House Assembly should have been able to concur with the engineering specification and design of that boat, whether it is suitable and satisfactory to satisfy the requirement of the Sea Bridge. And therefore, we need to have a mechanism to deal with that. In addition, we need to have a judicial mechanism to resolve conflict between the island government of Tobago and the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Whether we are going to establish the High Courts of Trinidad and Tobago as the court that sits as a constitutional court to look at the constitutional issues between the government of Tobago and the government of Trinidad and Tobago, I don't know, but there needs to be a mechanism, or whether we look towards another institution that can provide that kind of service.
May I ask a question? Do you have any specific recommendations as it relates to the various sections that are in the bill? Because what the bill, of course, came from the forum that had been established over a period of time, and quite a number of discussions took place. What we would like to know is if, in relation to this specific bill, you have any specific recommendations as it relates to the various sections and so on. I know you have said generally what your feelings are in relation to the bill, but do you have any specific recommendations that we could,
well, I've given some recommendations
to the committee so that we can take that back with us in order to, if we need to redraft or whatever. Do you have anything specific? And what I would like to ask, please, I have given Mr. Richards as the first speaker quite a lot of leeway. I'm going to have to limit the time for the additional speakers, okay, in normal parliamentary fashion.
Thank you, Madam
Okay.
Chair. Madam Chair, well,
So, Mr. Richards, it means that you don't have very much time left.
Well, I think I was at the end of my contribution, actually, Madam Chair. I think that my overall position is that, or my single recommendation will be that this bill should be withdrawn, and we approach this thing in a more simple way, where the constitutional requirement for Thomas Tobago is treated with under those 4 sections that I highlighted in my contribution. And Tobago is given the opportunity under its new legislative authority to write a bill that will speak to how the island government function, as opposed to trying to constitutionalize that in this bill. I thank
Mr.
you.
Richards, you do understand that this bill came from Tobago
Well, I'm not
to the
certain.
Parliament? Yes.
I'm not certain.
It did.
Okay.
It
well,
was written after the forum had its discussions, and it came from Tobago to the cabinet and then to the Parliament. The cabinet has not touched this bill. It is exactly what, after the various years of discussion, this is a bill that came in exactly this form to the cabinet, and then the cabinet took it to the Parliament in the exact form that it was sent. No changes have been made. This bill represents years of discussion from the people, by the people in Tobago. So this is from Tobago. It has not been amended in any way.
Madam Chair, just before I leave, am I to take it that the people of Tobago would have recommended a fiscal Review Commission to determine their financial needs. Thank you for having me.
I just want to repeat. This bill is exactly what came from Tobago.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
No changes have been made.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for your contribution. I don't know if you may want to put anything in writing also, although we've taken note of everything that you've said. But in terms of giving us something very detailed, you may want to take some time and send us a written submission.
Well, let me just inform the committee that I'm a member of a wider group that have looked at this bill in detail, and I think that something probably would have come to the committee already, or it's on its way to the committee.
Okay.
So thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Could I be excused, ma'am? I'm still worshiping. So,
Okay.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thanks for making the time to come to Tobago for this important conversation. I will use my limited time to make some quick observations and to make some recommendations. The name is Anthony R. Hector, a student of self-determination for Tobago for many years. Firstly, as I scanned, I noted that Tobago was deleted from the House of Assembly sentence. I also noted that there's need.
Can you tell me exactly where you're looking?
All right, I'll come into it as I get inside, because I have some specific sections I'm going to refer to.
Okay.
I noted also that there's need for a contract between the both nations, Trinidad and Tobago, for these ideas that are being advanced to work effectively, and for there to be some accountability process along the way. Because let me remind this committee, what we are trying to fix here is a major error from 1898, which was an act of union between Trinidad and Tobago, which was the greatest disaster that ever took place in terms of setting out a framework for a relationship between two nations. I also observed that there's need to describe in your document that we are dealing with nations, not islands. We need to up the language. I see islands, and I'm yes.
Mr. Hector, let me just say from the outset, the nation is the nation of Trinidad and Tobago.
What is the definition of nation?
That's the state. The state is Trinidad and Tobago. That is the name of the state.
So Tobago is not a state?
No, it's not.
Oh, I see. All right, we'll come to that.
That is the name of the state. So let us
All right.
understand that from the outset.
Yeah,
please.
but that could be bad language that we're using from way back. That needs to change.
That is how the United Nations describes
UN.
Country of Trinidad, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. That is the state. There's no state of Trinidad, and there's no state of Tobago. There's no nation of Trinidad, and there's no nation of Tobago.
Yeah, but something is wrong.
There's a nation called the Republic of Trinidad.
Something is wrong, and we need to try to fix it.
Could I just be allowed to indicate it? Because I'm also doing this for everybody who's here and whoever is looking at us and listening to us. The nation state is the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago.
All right, another thing before I get into the specifics is that I didn't see anywhere in this document where a clearly stated clause was provided for Tobago to break from Trinidad sometime in the future, because let's face it, things may not go well.
Mr. Hector, the bill that is before us does not contemplate a break between the two countries.
Unfortunately.
It does not contemplate secession.
No, independence, not secession.
Sorry. It does not contemplate secession. It does not contemplate independence. If that is, that will be an entirely different piece of legislation.
Oh, really?
So,
I'm surprised.
Yes,
I thought we were dealing with everything.
Mr. Hector, we're dealing with a bill for the autonomy of Tobago.
Okay.
As far as we understood it, we are here to discuss that and not the issue of independence of Tobago or the secession of Tobago.
But you provided
That
a bill
is-
for us to comment.
that
That's all.
is, Mr. Hector, may I be allowed to speak? May I?
Oh, you're talking all the time, Madam Chair.
May I be allowed to speak without you
Okay, sure.
interrupting? The bill before us is a bill for the autonomy of Tobago. It is not a bill for secession or independence. Those discussions were held, and the decision that we understand was taken by the forum of parties was this bill that is before us for the autonomy of Tobago, not secession, not independence. Thank you very kindly.
Yes, we are all entitled. Now, the preamble, section 4, which deals with, I like the language there, recognize the right to self-determination. Now, Madam Chair, if us who live in Tobago have the right to determine self-determination, why are we getting so many impositions out from outside of Tobago? Because there are lots of endorsements here where both cabinet and parliament in Trinidad has to approve. Self-determination means you can think about it at home, whether you're in your kitchen or your living room, and work towards implementing it using all the possible avenues available to you. So I just want the word self-determination to be understood as a right of a people, not a favor from someone else. Now, section 5 talks about the Constitution should be amended by inserting this particular clause. There shall be equality of status between the island of Trinidad, of course, you're all staying with the island. But how is that practically possible? I am saying that this particular clause is very conflicting. It's not practically possible for Tobago to have equal status with Trinidad. Tobago will continue to have a relationship that is subservient once we continue to go in the direction that we are going. So I'll be quick because I have these areas outlined. There shall be a cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago, and in that language, it gives the impression that after all is said and done, the cabinet is the boss. Now, we need to find an avenue to reduce that dependence on cabinet signing off on Tobago. You know, if we're going to be serious at all about dealing with, well, they're calling it self-government. Well, I hope we have a definition for that too. So I'm moving quickly along. Now, the meetings between the Prime Minister and the Chief Secretary, they have not worked in the past. They have not produced any results in the past. So what is really the value of still having that around to go forward? Now, I noted that there were no provisions for independent councillors in the newly outlined structure going forward. Now, along the way, we have to learn from some of the errors of the past, you know, Madam Chair and members of your committee. Based on this structure here, we could end up with about 21 persons on one side And we have no checks and balances. We have no outlet where questions and concerns from ordinary citizens and pressure groups or other important organizations could be aired or even challenged. So I am recommending that we don't make the errors of the past and to look for a possibility of having independent councillors as part of the structure, because I see the president playing a more meaningful role going forward with this document you've proposed. I'm almost to the end, just two more. Chapter 11A, Section 4. Just the last sentence there, which says, the Tobago House of Assembly shall have such other powers and functions in relation to Tobago. I'd use a reference for you earlier. Here's a living example of it. As may be prescribed. As may be prescribed. It's very bad language, man. I mean, if we're looking at a relationship between two pieces of real estate that's over 125 years old, we ought to by now be able to identify all the shortcomings. And if the other party is serious about giving Tobago what Tobago is entitled to in the first place, because nobody's doing a favor for Tobago, you know. Tobago is entitled to self-determination. Even God has given us that right. Now, finally, you know, again, we have to look at the future. And I noted that the term assemblyman continues to exist in this document. My recommendation is that we change that term to assembly representative, and I'll give you some justifications why. Now, I have already seen unfolding in the country where people are demanding their rights. So if we use a neutrally accepted term, we don't disrespect women by calling them assemblyman. Or if we have a transgender representative, whoever comes, representing whatever, we should have a term that's neutral. And I think if we consider using the term assembly representative, that would take care of the now and will take care of the future. And in essence, this is a document that one has to continue to study. So I just quickly pulled some of these areas. So this in essence is the submission I have to make. I hope I was reasonable with time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hector. Member endorsing.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Hector, for your submissions to the committee. And you focus a lot on the appointment of what you termed independent councillors and so on.
Yes.
If you care to elaborate in relation to who you think or how they should be appointed.
Okay. Well, I was looking at a model, for example, that exists now where the president appoints independent senators. All right? My brain couldn't go beyond the point where the president could be the one to appoint independent councillors in the best judgment of him or her based on the various circumstances that might be evolving in the society, if you understand where I'm coming from. Because you have youth, you have community, you have business, all those different areas that could come into play in terms of bringing a balance and assisting us into Tobago, because we have a crisis, you know. We have a crisis of transparency and accountability with this assembly institution. So some effort must be made to try to address that, because that's a runaway house right now.
Mr. Hector, the section of the bill that deals with the People's House, I think that was an effort to try and deal with that particular point that you raised about independent
Representatives?
Yes, because it will be persons from the parishes and also persons who represent various sectors in Tobago.
And who are appointing them?
No, they will be elected.
Elected?
Yes.
Well, we
So
have...
they won't be representing any political party, but they will be representing the people outside of the political sphere.
I hear you and
So
respect your view, Madam Chair, but we had an experience in Tobago where we had an independent senator who had already come through the political mill. So we had to try to avoid any semblance of the possibility of, if you know what I mean, that things can happen otherwise. And I'm saying let's find an avenue. Let's find an avenue that is a little more objective than the one that is being proposed.
Okay.
Yes?
Member Mahabir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. The question I have is with respect to your advocation of the independent representatives not politically affiliated to bring balance.
Yes.
In the Senate, as you know, in Trinidad and in the Senate of Trinidad and Tobago, there are 9 independents in a chamber of 30.
Yes.
Do you have a similar
formula
that you could recommend to the committee for the upper chamber that we're considering in Tobago that will add the kind of balance that you think would be necessary for good governance?
Yeah, well, initially I was looking at an uneven number like 3 to start the process. Let's see how it works, and then it can probably increase to 5.
A follow-up question. Appointed by whom? Appointed by the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, or appointed by the person who will hold the position of Chief Secretary on advice of the representatives of the people? So we need to work out the modalities, you see, as to who and what criteria will be used for the appointment of these independent representatives.
Yes, in my head, Member Javier, we have a system of appointment right now of councillors, 3 by the leading side and 1 by the minority side. So maybe for the best measure of independence, we can let the president appoint those persons, because the president has the ability, whoever he or she is, to test the system and investigate the system to bring that kind of presence.
Member Kajo.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to ask specifically Mr. Hector about this recommendation for the President to appoint the independents, because what is being prescribed...
councillors, in this case.
The independents. But I'm talking about the people for the People's House that you would have raised, right? That recommends 7 people from the parish and 6 representing specific interest group as it relates to Tobago's development. And you're saying that you would prefer for the president to appoint, but then you also raised that in the past we would have had a senator that came through the politics that ended up being an independent senator. So then that makes your view somewhat conflicting, and I want you to just clarify it, because I think the people of Tobago, wouldn't they know who came through the politics and who is really independent and place their votes accordingly, rather than rely on the president to make that assignment for them?
Well, to be honest with you, we have seen some shortcomings in the system. We have experienced it. This people's parliament, you call it? I can't remember. House. It's a new idea coming on stream. Actually, I was looking at the legislature aspect of it, where it is stated that councillors, this is where I was looking at Member Kojo. I was looking at that aspect of it, because this is a totally new idea. So as it comes on stream, it will evolve. We will learn from mistakes and so on. So I wasn't really able to do too much fleshing out on my head on that one. But the legislature, where the councillors are appointed, this is where I was thinking.
My thinking is that if we are looking at expanding, improving, and advancing the democracy, then I think we could trust the wisdom of the people to choose who they think are independent to represent them in that house, rather than rely on the wisdom of the president. But I guess it's something, as you say, you have to think about.
I hear you and respect your view. Just remember, we've had a total whitewash or yellow wash or wherever, red wash. We've had that before. We just need to possibly avoid a situation where we have that and no other voices cannot get through, no other issues cannot be challenged. The people say so.
The people would have the opportunity to, when they vote for whoever they want
the
to represent
house.
them in the people's house, they wouldn't, we have to trust the wisdom. Well, based on what's prescribed here, then we are being called upon to trust the wisdom. But your considerations are going to be deliberated.
Okay.
And this is why we're here, to hear your opinions and move forward.
Thank you.
Here.
Member Rambarat.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hector.
Mr. Hector,
yes.
could you turn off your mic?
Take it.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much for your contribution. I may not agree with, well, I recognize that what you are speaking about in the main is not what is before us. And I am very clear what is before us. That there may be another day when we are here to deal with that. I don't know if I'll be here. But I was struck by your last comment regarding the appointment of independents, because the tone of your contribution, even though it's not on the bill, your tone was that self-determination means that Tobago makes all decisions related to its own affairs, and I respect that that's your view. But you end by suggesting that the President of the Republic selects the independents, which goes against the grain of what you've said. The President of the Republic is the President of the Unitary State of Trinidad and Tobago. The President of the Republic is elected by an electoral college made up of parliamentarians representing both Trinidad and Tobago. And the President is as knowledgeable on the affairs of Tobago as any one of us. I am not Tobagonian by birth. I'm married to somebody who has her roots in Tobago. But when I took my oath to represent you and all citizens of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, so that I don't accept the argument that, and you yourself seem to accept that, being in Tobago and being Tobagonian are not necessarily criteria for making decisions that are best for Tobago. I do, in fact, accept your principle that an assembly should have a combination of people who contest elections and people who are not so inclined. And I would suggest, because I have had to grapple with the current provision in the bill, in how the two houses are going to be constituted. And I would suggest that you may, in the future, assist us by paying some attention to that and assisting us with what I see as a potential conundrum in selecting the part that requires that interest groups put forward a section of the other house. And there could be complications in that I believe Tobago must address. And I just want to emphasize, I sit in the cabinet, and this bill landed in the cabinet and flew off the table very quickly. We gave it absolutely no consideration because it represents the effort of the people of Tobago, and we do not wish to disturb that except through this consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Crease.
Good afternoon, Mr. Hector. I was taking it from the tenor of your contribution that you accepted the concept of a bicameral arrangement for Tobago. You accept that? But, so basically, what aspect of the second house, you're having a problem with, or you accept it?
Well, the bicameral system we know work. Out of Trinidad, bear in mind, is where we have the Parliament and the Senate which consists of 3 layers. So why I heard Member Kojo's submission on that aspect of how they'll be elected, but I am looking at an input that can come from some other entity outside of the politics, while I understand what Member Rambarat said as to how you elect the president. But remember, we have had experiences here in Tobago in the past that we have to fix, you know. This committee must remember that. We have lived a total period of all seats being won by one party. And then they came back and appointed 3 councillors to add to that. When that happens, memories, the door is closed. You can't even peep to see what's going on inside there. So I hope you all getting my picture, you know. I want us to have a system where we do not have a situation where one side win all and have all. That's what I'm trying to avoid. We've had the bad experience in the past, and we must fix the bad experiences from the past going forward. But as you said, more thought and more thinking could go into it. All right?
The other thing I'm trying to understand in terms of your presentation, you gave the impression that historical injustice has been done to Tobago in the unification process. I didn't quite get a handle on that.
Okay,
Can you elaborate a bit
you didn't
more?
get that clear?
Yeah.
Now, this relationship between Trinidad and Tobago, as we now know it today, started with an act of union from 1898. And as that relationship developed, what we noted was, remember that was an administrative and political relationship. What we noted over time is that Tobago either never got what it was entitled to through the governance structure that Trinidad used, or was ignored totally. I could probably touch on economic issue, for example. The first time this country experienced an oil boom, my research says that over $500 million passed through the system. Nothing was done to provide proper infrastructure for Tobago out of that money that will allow us here to make a valuable contribution to ourselves and the Treasury. Are you getting me now, sir?
Thank you.
Member Hussein.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Mr. Hector, thank you for your contribution. And you raised some very interesting points regarding the Tobago legislature and how we go forward. The committee has deliberated on various views, and we have received certain submissions from other stakeholders. And one of those submissions, and I would just like to get the view of yourself and the wider listening audience, is that whether or not we require 2 houses of legislature in Tobago, meaning that is there a requirement that we should have the People's House, or the alternative arrangement is that just as the president has the power to appoint 9 independent senators from various disciplines, that there be some provision being put in place in the Constitution that allows for a mandatory provision so that there are senators from Tobago being appointed to the national parliament.
Yes, thank you for the question. Now, I like the former rather than the latter, because we have had many experiences where our brothers and sisters from Tobago who are supposed to be seeking our interests, when they dress up and they jump the plane and they land in Port of Spain, they forget totally what their role and responsibilities are. We need to widen the base of governance in Tobago. As a matter of fact, there was a suggestion some years ago that we have an assembly of village and community councils, which to me was sounding like a kind of local government structure which would assist in diversifying responsibilities, give communities responsibility, do your drains, do your garbage collection, give them a little power and let them build and grow, and it will act as a sort of graduation system. So I like the former suggestion. We in Tobago on the ground need to be exposed to more debating and more conversations and more disagreeing to agree to strengthen ourselves, because I suspect sometime in the future, I hope that the chairperson will be around. There will be a very important conversation taking place.
Thank you, Mr. Hector. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind those persons who may be looking at us or listening to us that you can send in your contributions via Tobago Self-Gov at ttparliament.org. Tobago Self-Gov at ttparliament.org, all lowercase. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Good evening to the committee, or good afternoon. It's 2:14, so I guess it's still good afternoon. So I have my own question, but I kind of just wanted to say something before I got into that.
Can we get your name, please?
Oh, I didn't say Jason. No, sorry.
And
Jason.
If you represent an organization, we'd be happy to know.
Okay. Well, my name is Jason Arthur, and I do not represent any organization as of yet. I haven't been picked. I think one of the things that we need to consider when we're looking at the bill is that we're actually trying to either fix or improve problems. And as I heard Mr. Hector talking, I started thinking that what we're trying to do is either fix or improve, and I think I prefer the word improve the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago, right? We're not trying to necessarily destroy the relationship, which to me is what secession kind of would do. And I think if we look at it like that, we might look at the bill a little bit differently. One of those problems that we've had in the past is, whether rightly or wrongly, Tobago's perception of not being equal in the partnership. And when I was looking at J, which talks about the 8% allocation, I went back to when I first saw the judgment of the Dispute Resolution Commission, and it stated 4.03% to an upper limit of 6 point something, I can't remember. And I remember when I looked at it, I was like, okay, what is this mathematics about? I'm not sure. So I took the 4.3% and I did a little quick, division, 100% divided by 4.3%. And what I noticed was that at the lower limit, it sort of represented the populations of both islands. And you saw sort of an equitable distribution of the money. I couldn't understand the upper limit, but that's fine. So I saw something that made sense to me in the lower limit. Now I look at J. J is basically suggesting double the amount, 4.03, now it's 8. And so the question I want to ask is, what's the reason for that? Because now it almost looks as though Tobago gets twice times what everybody in Trinidad gets per capita. And so I want to know, what was the thrust behind that, and what problem was that trying to address? Why double it? I'm not saying that I have an issue with it. I mean, I'm in Tobago, I'm glad. But I just kind of want to know, what was the thrust behind that? And that's my question.
Mr. Arthur, the committee did make an effort to determine where the 8% came from in previous meetings, and as yet we do not have an explanation for the figure. You're right when you say that the figure that exists now was based on a formula, but at this time we do not have an explanation for the 8% from those who brought the bill before us.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Member Mahabir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Arthur, this was a matter that did concern me as well. The issues were raised with the representatives now of the THA, and there was an assurance that there will be evidence with respect to the infrastructural needs of Tobago, the current state of development, what are the projects that are in the pipeline, how much that is going to cost, and on the basis of that, one is going to come up. This 8% seemed to have been an estimate only, but with more structured economic analysis, principally based upon infrastructure needs and future development requirements, there is a view that the per capita budgetary allocation for Tobago should be higher. How much higher, of course, is yet to be determined. And yeah, I myself am looking for the evidence which will back this up with respect to the additional requirements to bring Tobago up to a particular level that it wishes to be so that it could be internationally competitive.
Can I ask a question in response to that? Obviously, they're about to codify this and make it permanent to some degree, right? Until, of course, you have another session like this and we change it. And so if we're saying it's based on infrastructural needs, just as an example, infrastructural needs are not permanent. It may be for the next 5 years, 10 years, or whatever the case may be, but you're about to put this thing in there. So is it that after those infrastructural needs are met or whatever other needs, you roll it back? You understand what I'm asking?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, the issue arose because, you see, the objective ultimately is for Tobago to raise within Tobago, based upon its state of development in the future, enough resources so that it would be economically independent. When that time reaches, of course, the issue will have to be raised and revised. Is it that there is a need at that time? But ultimately, the objective would be for economic independence, so that all the revenue requirements of Tobago would be raised and kept within Tobago without any need for that particular transfer. And the question is, will it come? When will it come? We don't know. But is there hope that it will arise? And the answer is yes. If you see in the bill, there is some provision for Tobago being able to borrow. Of course, if there is a provision for Tobago being able to borrow, it implies that Tobago will be able, out of revenue generation, to service its debt, not to rely on central government to service its debt. It could rely on central government in exceptional circumstances. So I think ultimately where we are going, where at what time, is it 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, a generation from today, is ultimately economic independence. And this matter of the 8% in my mind seems to be transitory, but I await further evidence. You have eminent economists in Tobago. I await further evidence from them to provide the necessary data which will justify the movement from the 4 to 6 to 8% in the Constitution.
Can I offer something a little bit cautionary? Trinidad and Tobago has this history, this sort of a tenuous kind of a relationship at times. And one, people's memories, not very long. And two, politicians are politicians. You know, we use things down the road for our advantage to drive wedges where we think we need to drive wedges. I'm just worried that this thing is at 8% now, and then in the future comes and it arrives, and now we say, okay, let's roll it back. And then it turns into Trinidad take back the money from Tobago, blah, 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 and somebody is using it as a political football and tries to injure the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago and blah, blah, blah. You know, I just really think that is something to sort of consider. Of course, we're living in the here and now, so 10 years from now, we're probably not really studying that, but I just think it's something to think about.
Madam Chair, just a follow-up to that, and that is, I think it creates the avenue for continuous dialogue, as we are having now, and that when there is a clear need for an arrangement to be altered, it creates the opportunity for a dialogue. If at some time, hopefully, Tobago generates a surplus more than what it needs for its current expenditures and its capital needs, clearly the 8% would become irrelevant. And I think that at that point in time, it may be hypothetical, But at that time, we dialogue, we speak as to whether, in fact, there are certain areas of the bill which should then not be amended. The law is a living thing, but it has to be with continuous dialogue. So I don't myself see a problem with a figure. What currently is lacking for me as for you is the justification, what we call the micro foundations, the micro underpinnings. How did we come to move from 4% to 8%, or an upper limit of 6% to 8%? We are awaiting, and I'm hoping evidence will come to justify to the national parliament that the current arrangement of a maximum of 6 can and should in fact be moved to 8%. Thanks.
Thank you very much, everyone. I don't know if anybody else.
Just 1 second, please. Member Crease.
Would you therefore like to see a sunset clause be placed into this with relation to that provision of the 8% or 4%, whatever the percentage?
I wouldn't give a recommendation per se, although that sounds like a good idea. I would just like something to ensure that we do not forget, we meaning Trinidad and Tobago, and that this doesn't turn into something to drive a wedge between the two islands later on. Because you all know how money works. When you take away people money, that does get vexed. And I just don't want to see something like that happen. So I just really feel as though this needs to stay in the minds of both islands for as long as it goes, so that somebody doesn't use it in an expedient, well, a politically expedient manner in the future.
Yes, sir. Mr. Endorsing, Member Endorsing.
Mr. Arthur, again, thank you for your contribution. And I think to an extent, you answered, and you may want to agree or point me in that direction, because you spoke of the tenuous relationship, and then you focused on the 4.3% in terms of the appropriation of monies, and then you went on to the 8%, and you seem to have done a bit of research in terms of analyzing or attempting to analyze this particular scenario in the legislation that is before us. And I really wanted to ask you what would have been your recommendation, but you said that you would not want to make any recommendation, if I get you right.
You're correct. I just noticed something that could be problematic, right? I didn't think about a recommendation per se. And part of the reason I couldn't think of a recommendation is I didn't understand what the figure was addressing in the first place. And so if I don't understand that, I can't even begin to give a recommendation.
So you don't have a clear understanding with even the 4.3?
Well, as I said, all I did with, and it's 4.03.
True, yeah.
All I did was some math, right? And the math worked out to an equitable distribution of the money. However, it starts at 4.03 and it goes to 6 point something. So even though I got an answer for the lower limit, I didn't have an answer for the upper limit. So I still didn't really know what it was about, right? With this here, well, 8% is practically double. And then so I said, well, what's going on now, you know? So, I'm not here pretending that I'm clear on what was done and how the figures came about. You know, just some of the math was very coincidental. And while I was actually talking about the math, I saw Ms. Kudjo kind of shaking her head. So I was like, okay, maybe she's concurring certainly with the lower limit. But it still doesn't explain the upper limit, 6 point something.
Okay, thank you.
Member De Freitas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to maybe try and give a little bit of insight. No, I completely concur as to the 8% in terms of the justification, which I guess would come out at a later date. But in terms of when I heard the 8% for the first time, I tried to understand as to why it would have gone up first, as to why they landed on 8% might be something different, and I'm sure that formula would come out. But I think the justification for going up specifically would have been due to the fact that we had a Dispute Resolution Commission formula put forward before, and we spoke to the 4.03%. But the realization of that over the last 20 years has been it's always been towards the lower limit. And you would notice that every June there's a budget put forward for Tobago, and then there's a national budget that comes out in October. And then when you look at two, there's always a difference. So Tobago says they need, for example, 5 billion to run the affairs of Tobago. And then in the national budget, it always comes up to about 2 or 3 billion. So there's always a gap. And in putting forward the bill, I'm sure they would have taken that into consideration, which is why you would have seen everything else put in relation to the ability to borrow, to sort of finance that gap, and the ability to invest, to even take that borrowed money and make more money. So I'm assuming the end goal overall is to get to a point where Tobago becomes a net contributor to the consolidated fund of the country, as opposed to what it is now, where Tobago is just drawing down as per the DRC's formula. The other thing with the 8% and what could possibly happen in the future in terms of reducing it, I want to believe that there's some robust checks and balances there. In other words, if the 8% is agreed to at the end of the day, then in order to change that, it requires a 3/4 majority and a 2/3 majority in the Senate, and 3/4 would be in the House, obviously. And of course, that could happen, where one particular side has that, and therefore it's nothing more than a vote to do it. So I do take that comment that you made there, but again, with the DRC that's there, precedence has been set. So I want to believe that in the future, if that has to be moved downwards, that it would be taken through the DRC as much as it was when it needed to be moved upwards, when we got the 4.03 and the 6% and the 6+%. So I take the point that it could be moved downwards. I'm just not sure how easy it would be to do, given that you need that majority and the precedence of the DRC before, in the sense that any moving of that number would sort of go through that dispute resolution commission or through the process that we're doing now, where you have this consultative process before you make that change to the constitution. Because once it's changed, it's set. Even if you want to change anything with any of the houses, if you want to add another councillor, you have to come back right through this process. And you have to go through the 2/3 majority in the Senate and the 3/4 in the House. So it's not an easy thing to change, which is what I'm really trying to say. So when we are deciding on the 8%, that is why we are taking the comments now and make sure we have the formula right, because you could end up in a situation again where you're asking for 10 billion 50 years from now, but you're only getting 6, even with that 8%.
So let me take you up on part of your answer. Part of your answer went like this. Typically, when Tobago asks for money, there is a gap between the upper limit, which is 6 point something, I always forget the upper limit, and what it actually gets. And it sounds as though you were saying, so they decided to up it a little more. You know, kind of like in negotiations where they say if you want 10%, ask for 15%, and you'll get 10. That's kind of what I'm hearing. I don't know if that's what you meant.
Just I'm sort of saying that that's probably the reason that they went up. I can't say why they landed on 8% specifically. There must be a formula there which we'll find out before anything is set, obviously. But in terms of just moving upwards, and as you rightly pointed out, it's double the 4.03%, but it's a range. It's 4.03 to the 6% that's there, and now we're getting rid of the range and we're saying set 8%, and of course that has to be justified. I'm just saying that it's going up because we realize that even though you had the range before, as per the DRC, that was set 20 years ago, you find out that actually every year they ask for X amount. This is what we need to run Tobago's affairs, and this is what we get, and there's always a gap.
Okay, so I'll just say this last thing. So what we're trying to do, it seems, forget about what the actual percentage is, but by taking out the range, instead of Tobago sitting down thinking, well, you know, we can get between 4.3 and 6 point something, and let's see how much of that range they give us, which makes it a little bit harder to plan, right? Right, because you could be talking about $100 million, $200, $300 million difference in that range. Actually, even more than that. We are giving us now, or we are putting a percent, a specific percent, and so Tobago can now plan because it will get whatever the percentage. It might not be 8% when everything is said and done, but whatever that percentage is, Tobago can depend on that percentage. Is that what I'm hearing?
Before Member Kajo speaks, could I indicate that when Tobago gets its allocation, it gets that specific allocation, but then in various ministries,
Yes.
there are certain things that are done for Tobago
Yes.
through those ministries. So apart from the dollar figure of the 4.03%, the Ministry of, I mean, I can name a few of the ministries. The Ministry of National Security, through the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the ministry itself, they provide certain things for Tobago as part of their allocation. Then the Ministry of Social Development, the Ministry of Community Development. So they're, apart from the 4.03%, which Tobago will get, the other developmental projects are undertaken by ministries.
Right, certainly. So I guess the question really is that going to remain consistent? So if you give them 8% or whatever figure you decide on, the other things that are done by the other ministries, the other spending, is that going to remain consistent, or is it now in all one big ball?
As far as we understand this bill, those things which still remain within the purview of the central government will continue to be spent by the central government.
Right.
Member Kajol.
Madam Chairman, I wanted to join at this point in time because this matter as it relates to the percentage and funding is very important, and I think we need to place all the cards on the table. Now, as it relates to the 4.03%, the lower limit and the population and so on, I concur with what Mr. Asa was saying. We also have to remember that the original document speaks to this 4.03 with an upper limit of 6.9, and then lower in the document it speaks to the central government also has to consider where Tobago is in its development, the fact that we are separated by water and so on. Then we looked at the different schedules. Tobago is responsible for what central government is responsible and so on. This is the current construct that we're in right now. Now, I can recall that the Tobago House of Assembly would have submitted the formula to us and explained to us the formula, and I think that information also needs to be shared because it's not simply a doubling of the figure. The House of Assembly, in their explanation, would have spoken to population growth. Right now that it's approximately 5%, would have also taken into consideration the 2013 bill that spoke to 6.9%, would have also looked at the disparity in development and the new responsibilities as proposed in the new schedule in the new act. So I know these are some of the things that were taken into consideration in looking at the 8%. I want to add to that though, because I think what is required for Tobagoanians or everybody considering this matter is the real picture as it relates to how much does Tobago really contribute to the economy? What is really required to get us to be economically independent? Even in the energy scenario, how much do we really contribute and how much should we really be getting back as it relates to the private sector and the payment of taxes and so on? So we need to place all the cards on the table and get this right once and for all, but I know it wasn't simply a doubling of the figures from 4% to 8%, that there were some other items taken into consideration, and that was shared with us, and I think we need to share that information far and wide so that we can get this thing right at this point in time. And I want to place on the table that I concur with what Member Crease would have raised in a sunset clause or some kind of strategy that we can revisit it so we're not stuck with this percentage and later on we don't know how and have to get the right parliamentary mix to change it and so on. So we need to have the conversation open and get it right.
Thank you very much, everyone. If there's no other response to that specific question, I think I will depart.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arthur. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, good afternoon, Madam Chairman, members, and attending concerned citizens. My name is Rachel Almondos. I live in Bacalat, and I have just two simple points to make this afternoon, which are perhaps omissions from the bill, the Act to amend the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to accord self-government to Tobago, to repeal the Tobago House of Assembly Act, Chapter 25(3), and for related matters. My first concern is that as a democracy, that whoever is chosen as a leader of the Tobago government should serve no more than 2 terms in office. I feel as a democracy, 2 terms in office is democratic and not socialist. As in the past, where I will not mention anyone in particular, but 16 years of reign is not a democracy. My second point that I would like to make is that in the past, which we have to correct for the future, is that there has been no accountability for financials from the past Tobago House of Assembly. Millions and billions of dollars have not been accounted for. And to progress to this stage for autonomy of Tobago, I think that certain points, facts, suggestions really for accountability has to be put in place in this draft so that we do not find ourselves in the past again. Those are my 2 simple points, and thank you very much for listening.
May I
Thank you, Ms. Almonders. Member Kaju.
Ms. Almonders, based on your recollection of this non-accountability for money and so on, and the issues that you would have raised, do you have a recommendation that you want to propose to the committee that we can...
I will love to do that in writing.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you very clearly. Member Hussain.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You raised some very important points with respect to strengthening the democracy of the new Tobago self-governance, and term limits is quite a very interesting argument, even within the national parliament. But I also want to get your views with respect to the right of recall of members who are elected to serve on the Tobago legislature.
Again, 2 terms in office?
When I say right of recall in terms of, for example, there must be some trigger mechanism if you realize your representative is not representing you to the best of your ability, whether you would like the opportunity as constituents to have that power.
Member Hussain, that really is not before us.
I know that respectfully, Madam Chair, but it's just she raised the point of the term limit, so
term
they
limits,
went hand
yes.
in hand.
Term limits, yes, but that is not before us. Sorry, that's it. Mr. Mahabir, Mr. Crease, you wanted to say something? Just, he's giving away to Member Mahabir.
The signal first, Madam Chair. For the interest of collegiality, we will allow our colleagues to go first.
Member Crease.
On the question of the 2-term limitation, do you envisage the person taking a rest and coming back, or that's it for their political career?
That's it.
That's it. Okay. On the question of better financial accountability, do you have any specific recommendations to make?
I do, and it's very substantial, and it would have to be in writing.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Again, with respect to the THA's accountability, do you think that transfers from central government to the Tobago government should be conditional upon audited figures being presented in a timely fashion so that there is full transparency with respect to how public funds are used?
Yes, sir.
Very well, okay. And the second, with respect to the term limits, are you recommending that both for Trinidad and Tobago, the term limits be kept to 2 terms for the Prime Minister. Because, you see, I'm finding a bit of a challenge to have in the Constitution a requirement for Tobago to subscribe to a maximum of 2 term limits for its Chief Secretary. And in Trinidad, it's no limitation. So do you accept that maybe your recommendation will have to apply to Trinidad as well to ensure that there's uniformity in the democracy?
Well, we can leave that up to debate, but I do feel from our past experience, 2 terms would be fine.
Member Kajo, you had something else?
Chairman, I just wanted to ask her a little more, because what's your last name again? Miss Almandas?
Miss Almandas.
Miss Almandas, you're saying that having the limitation on the terms is promoting democracy, but if the people choose a specific person to lead them over and over and over, and now you're putting a limit on the term, right? And then even when you look at how a chief secretary is selected, because it's after you win, then the electoral college, if I may say, of the house that determines that places a vote, both in the parliament and in the House of Assembly, as to who the chief is or the head is. Are you also proposing a change to the section in the document, in the bill, as to how you choose a chief secretary also?
Not necessarily. My only debate is because of the fact that there has been a lack of transparency with financials. The public has been misled towards elections and duped, in my personal opinion, of the true beings and happenings of what is really going on in the government. That is my only concern. If there was transparency and honest financial statements being made periodically and on time, the general public probably would not have voted a 3rd and 4th time.
Okay, so you think putting a limit on the chief secretary's term would treat with these financial concerns that you have?
It would also treat with financial concerns, and it would also make that person in position to use his or her time wisely and make the most of 1 or 2 terms in office.
Okay, well, Ms. Almandas, I look forward to your written submissions for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. James.
Thank you, Chair. I see you know my name. Thanks to the committee for coming to Tobago and holding this.
Mr. James, I just want to recall, did you go up against me in Aruka South?
No, I wasn't that fortunate. And you never ran in Tobago, so. My name is Vanus James. Somebody said doctor. And I have been part of a number of committees organized here in Tobago. I can put specifics in writing for you, to consider this issue in anticipation of the fact that you would be coming here. As far back as September, we've been thinking about this and working through some of the details in the bill. I'd like to begin by making the first observation that the Bill A and Bill B that I got a chance to read in 2016 looked a little bit different to this bill that's been placed in Parliament, and there's one important sense in which they were different. They both included definitions of Tobago and Trinidad, and that's a glaring omission in this bill. But my summary comments are these, that this bill, notwithstanding its intent, doesn't succeed in delivering self-determination to Tobago. There are 2 senses in which we need to consider that. One is political, And a crucial one is the economic self-determination, mechanisms to promote the achievement of economic self-determination rather than the growing dependence that we see exhibited in the data. So we need some reworking. And it also doesn't succeed in upgrading our democracy beyond what we now have in the current THA Act. Some reworking is also needed in that regard. To deal with all that reworking, I want to agree with the position I heard articulated by our Chief Secretary, our current Chief Secretary, which is that a common position across Tobagonians should formulate a common position and submit that common position to you as a committee. And that common position has not yet been articulated, and this bill doesn't represent it. So I want to agree with the Chief Secretary on that, and in that context, commit to working with and supporting and articulating elements of that common position that you can receive as a committee to do your work. There are some specifics. Yes.
Mr. James,
yes.
In relation to that point specifically, the life of this committee ends on July 31st if we do not get an extension by the Parliament. Would it be possible for your team to give us those submissions before that date? Because we are working with a specific time, because we understand that this has been on the table for years, and we really are determined to ensure that we come to the Parliament with a bill that both Tobago and Trinidad accepts as what Tobago and Trinidad want. So we have a July 31st deadline. Can I ask whether or not you'd be able to give us some written concrete submissions before that date?
Well, there are two comments I'd make there. One is we have a number of things we can already send to you that the bill should address. But secondly, in terms of teamwork, we could do our best to send you something as soon as possible, taking into account the fact that you have a deadline. It would be worth a while to notice, though, that this matter is so important that we've got to get it right. We've got to get something that all sides in the Parliament can support, both the opposition and the government. And I want to agree with your early comments when you started the discussion, that a major part of our objective here is to upgrade our democracy. And there are critical elements in that direction that we don't have at all, not mentioned in the bill. And that's the very first specific that we would address in any document we send to you. The country has signed on to the Sustainable Development Goals, and a big part of those goals is inclusive government. There is no effort in this bill at all to deal with that issue. And after you take our history, long history, from slavery to now into account, one of the major objectives, anybody framing a serious constitution, to say nothing of an amendment on behalf of the people of Tobago, taking steps in that direction, should care a lot about mechanisms to allow the public to be properly integrated into the process of governing beyond elections. So we will have recommendations in that direction that we want to raise with you. A critical issue that this bill fails to address is truly the definition of Tobago and the definition of Trinidad. And if the goal is equality of status, we're going to need that definition. The bill itself, in that context, cuts off into the fourth schedule a number of areas that Tobago and the Tobago legislatures, the Tobago legislature as defined in the bill, should have a say in many elements, including foreign affairs. And the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension the government of Trinidad, will have a say in those areas, and Tobago will not under these provisions. And that will not work in the end. Once you start to attempt serious development here in Tobago, the people here will find, the legislature here will find, that it will need a say in many of those areas in order to shape sound policy for successful economic development, especially here in Tobago. And so we'll need to deal with that, and we can send you comments in relation to that specific fact. There is, in addition to that, this challenge that we will have with the Fiscal Review Commission. As it is designed now, it is accountable only to the government in Trinidad. Let me put it that way. In that sense, the government of Trinidad and the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, when I first read the bill, I asked myself, what if the people of Tobago, and specifically what if the Tobago legislature, disagrees with the provisions made, the arrangements made and proposed by the Financial Review Commission? We have no dispute resolution mechanism in the bill. We have no way for the Financial Review Commission to reflect the intents and the policies of the Tobago legislature. So it is just going to be a prescription for further warming of the waters on the matter of anti-Trinidad feeling and secession. And so you need to treat with that by a redesign of this Financial Review Commission. The other thing about the provisions for financing of Tobago is that they are ill-conceived. Let me join with you the clarification of what the results of the Dispute Resolution Commission really were. The 4.03%, as Mr. Arthur was pointing out, really did reflect, I was part of the commission, so I can tell you, really did reflect the proportional allocations of national funds to the citizen, equal treatment of every citizen. That's where the 4.03% came from. Tobago's population at that time was 4.03%. As Ms. Kojo has indicated, it's now about 5.1%, somewhere in that zone. So if we are going to maintain that principle, the base should move upwards. Now, the 6.9% came from the work we were doing at the time to estimate the development needs of Tobago. We framed the development budget under Chief Secretary Hochoy Charles and came up with the estimates that we needed somewhere in the region of about $2 billion to get started. Now, that's where that came from. And if you take the gap between the 4.03% and the 6.9%, and you move the base up by 5%, then the upper end will move to about 8%. But I think we made a slight error in our work in the Dispute Resolution Commission in that we didn't properly take into account a third element that has to do with the financing of development of Tobago in the national interest. So those percentages we're talking about are allocations to the THA. But if you look at the data, and if you look at the state of the national economy, the country knows that we have to diversify this economy to avoid the negative effects of the oil shocks. What you will find when you do the analytical work is that the mechanisms of diversification hugely lie in developing the Tobago economy. This is where we will have the best opportunities to develop a diversified tourism sector in which we adjust the reasons people have for coming to Tobago and to the country beyond sea, sun, and sand. And so the key thing is that investment in that way, investment to develop the potential of the Tobago economy and deliver the self-determination on the economic front that Dr. Mahabir was talking about, requires investment on a scale above the potential of the Tobago legislature, even if you gave 8%. So this bill has to make clear provisions for the national government to invest in the development of Tobago in the national interest if it thinks that that is what will help to achieve the diversification goal. And what that means...
May I ask a question,
yes.
Mr. James? Sorry to cut you. So are you suggesting, therefore, that within the bill, which will be a constitutional, which will have a constitutional remit, that the bill itself should state that there must be investment in Tobago to ensure diversification? Is that what you're saying?
It must be written in such a way that if the national government, which I conceive properly as government of Trinidad and Tobago, assuming there's government for Trinidad and government for Tobago, the national government could see, as it is doing now for oil and gas. When you invest in oil and gas in Trinidad, you invest in the industry based mainly in Trinidad, in the national interest, and Tobago gets a share. Now, if the country perceives that the best way to diversify the economy is to develop the Tobago economy, it must be able to come as a country and invest in Tobago, and the proceeds from that shared across the country in the same way. That has to be invested to that which is provided by 4.03% to 6.9%, or 5 to 8, as the case might be. That's not sufficient.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I needed a clarification, Dr. James, and
yes,
that
yes,
is, are you saying that in addition to the PSIP of the Tobago government, the PSIP of the Trinidad arm of the unitary state of Trinidad and Tobago should also specifically include projects in Tobago which would come under the financing of central government? That the PSIP of Trinidad and Tobago should include projects in Tobago which are of a national interest and which will aid in the process of economic development of both Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, and if you have equal status, so you have a government of Tobago and a government of Trinidad and a government of Trinidad and Tobago, then you could see how that makes sense. The government of Trinidad and Tobago could invest in Trinidad in the national interest, or in Tobago in the national interest.
May I say something before we go too far with this argument? As the minister responsible for the PSIP already does that. Already. As a matter of fact, one of the documents that is presented to the Parliament is the PSIP, which is a national PSIP, and then there is a Tobago PSIP, which is specific to Tobago. So I mean, we could have this argument, but I just prefer that the record is set straight. There's already that in existence. So there is no need for us to argue this point. There is a Tobago PSIP, which comes from the Economic Development Plan of Tobago. So it's not like Trinidad sits there and says, this is what Tobago has to do. The THA sends to Trinidad, this is our economic plan. The THA also sends to Trinidad, this is our budget. Sometimes they don't get everything, all the amounts that they ask for, but there is a Tobago PSIP. So when you get the documents in your package, apart from the yellow books and so on, there's a social development PSIP, there's a Tobago PSIP, there's the national PSIP. So that's already done.
Yeah, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that even though we see it in the airport investment, we're seeing it in the sandals and so on, but it's the mechanism in the bill doesn't specifically address it. So it will be a matter of default that you choose to do it if you feel good down in Trinidad. But the provisions in the bill, which we're addressing now, do not address that issue.
All right. Mr. James, apparently you're generating quite a lot of interest, even before you've completed your submission.
Mm-hmm.
So I have Member Cummings aching to speak, and then I have Member Rambarat, who also wants to speak. Anybody else before Mr. James concludes? Mr. James, you're causing problems.
Yes, Member Cummings.
So,
Thank you.
Member Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's not so much of an ache, but I will proceed with my question to Dr. James.
Mm-hmm.
You're the second presenter who raised the issue of the omission of a definition for Trinidad and a definition for Tobago in the bill. I have my own ideas, but I would like to hear from you what is the thinking behind the question of including the definition, please.
Equal status. If you are going to achieve the goal you set out in the bill, clause 5, that you want to provide for equal status between Tobago and Trinidad, A, we have to know what is Tobago, And B, we have to know what is Trinidad, and neither is defined here, and what is Trinidad and Tobago, so we can make a judgment as to what equality of status applies to. Right now, there is no equality of status achieved in this bill, because Tobago is defined in terms of 11 miles around its baseline for the purpose of making law and not any other purpose. There is no equivalent definition for Trinidad, just as the issues arise with respect to the fourth schedule and all of those kinds of things. There is no Financial Review Commission for Trinidad. There is no equality of status in the bill, and a major part of that is because you haven't defined what you mean by Trinidad and what you mean by Tobago and what you mean by Trinidad and Tobago. For example, if you had 11 miles around Trinidad too, then we could say the rest is Trinidad and Tobago in some sense, outside of those 11-mile boundaries. And then the equality of status applies to 11 miles around Trinidad and 11 miles around Tobago. As it is now, the way we think of Trinidad and Tobago in Tobago is that Tobago is half the country, not 10% or 5%. We are half of the nation made up of 2 islands. And in that context, equality of status means you provide similar provisions for Trinidad as you provide for Tobago. For that to happen, you're going to have to define Trinidad and define Tobago. That's the point.
Yeah. All right. Mr. James and members, I had indicated previously that we made no changes to the bill. We did remove the definition of Tobago based on advice from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in terms of international law. So we did have to remove the definition of Tobago. But in section 141A, specifically,
yes,
I think it's clause 11, where it talks about what a Tobago statute is, it does give a kind of definition of what Tobago will be. But because of the constraints placed upon us by international law, we had to remove the definition of Tobago as was presented to the committee originally. So I want to put that on the table. And that is specifically, I'm glad you mentioned the issue of foreign affairs matters, because it was specifically in relation to how we would be defined internationally. So
I understand your point, Minister, but I would then say that that section of the bill should be severely amended to reflect what we would normally want to treat as equal status in a proper definition, even if you don't put the definitions in the bill in the way we're talking about. Where the law is applicable, the definition should work in such a way that Tobagonians could understand that if you say, for example, you thought of equal status and you took the baseline measures between Tobago and Trinidad, the median line, and you take all of that median line north of Tobago, you could say in the bill that the laws made by Tobago would be applicable there. And if you thought of it that way, you would see why I am making the point that the bill doesn't provide properly for the investment of Trinidad and Tobago in Tobago, including in any resources that might exist in the Tobago space. But let me, Dr. Rambarat wanted to.
Not Doctor yet, Dr. James.
Yeah.
Dr. James, you know I respect your views, and I came here expecting to hear you, and I just want to make 5 quick comments on your opening before I get to the economic issues. The first is to say that I am not surprised that we are being asked to search Tobago for another common position. My question is, how much time will be spent searching for a common position? The reality is that once you have competing political parties and once you have people of different interests, you will not have common views. That is just the nature of society. So the search for common views is not something we should be looking for. What we should be searching for, and the objective of consultations like this, is to get views and opinions And ultimately, we may agree on some and we may disagree, but we'd understand what everybody is thinking. Because in the search for common views, there's a level of idealism that can't work. People you sit in labs and you produce something that appears workable, but deployed in the real world, it may not function. And sometimes as legislators and politicians, we have that problem of people trying to formulate something that they believe will work because it sounds good, but put to work in a working environment, there's difficulty in it. And I think what we're trying to do is to understand what Tobago wants and work it into something that we believe could work. And that is my view on the search for a common document. But I want to go back to the economic argument, and I anticipated that somebody would say we have Tobago, which is 50%, and Trinidad, which is 50%. And I mean no disrespect to Tobago by drawing this analogy. I'm from the constituency of Mayaro in Trinidad. Mayaro is the size of the 6 neighboring constituencies. And Mayaro is 1/8 of Trinidad. And Mayaro could easily claim 1/8 of what Trinidad produces. So that if we go on the basis of size or population, everybody, because when we talk, we don't only talk for Tobago, we talk for every corner of Trinidad and Tobago. And we would have to work with a formula ultimately that represents what is in the best interest of Tobago. But you are, as you know, I've followed you, and when you are in the OECS, for example, last year you were in Grenada, March 2017, and you were making the point that in the development of the economies of the OECS, they have to work together. They must grow together. No constituent island in the OECS could go it alone. And there you have a model that you have each component of the OECS is politically independent and independent in many other ways. But we recognize that they must co-develop. And that has to do with 2 factors. One is size, and one is the fragility of tourism. Tourism is inextricably linked to North American and European markets over which we have very little control. So the working of the islands together in an economic model creates some level of buffer, but also creates some level of economies of scale. And in Tobago, it's no different. I think we have to face the fact that under the best circumstances in terms of economic investment in Tobago, Tobago may still not produce what it needs on an annual basis. And that is not surprising because Tobago is tied to Trinidad, and the capital development of Tobago is largely funded by the capital success of Trinidad. And we have to separate the political design of the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago with the economic relationship between Trinidad and Tobago. Because Trinidad and Tobago must, like the OECS, develop together. And the funding of the development of Tobago by Trinidad recognizes that at best, the geographic limitations and the natural resource limitations do not create the opportunity for Tobago to fund all its needs. And that is my view.
Let me comment on both issues. I take first the matter of the democracy. What this Joint Select Committee represents is a move by the government of Trinidad and Tobago to get the opinions of its citizens to allow citizens to influence how you make law. That's right. And that's a good move. That's partly what we mean when we say include the citizens. There is in this bill no mechanism for that kind of inclusiveness. So why is it good for Trinidad or Trinidad and Tobago to have inclusive mechanisms in the operation of the parliament, like you, and the government of Tobago shouldn't have that? So I think there is no way you could treat our participation here today as good governance and not see the need to include in this bill, notwithstanding all the business of idealism about full consensus and so on. When you're dealing with the matter of consensus, it's always about a critical minimum. And that critical minimum is always defined in terms of the opportunity provided by citizens, provided to citizens, to participate in the process of government beyond elections. How far do you want to go?
Let me just be clear. Yeah. When you spoke about a common position, were you I got the impression you were saying, let's go back and allow Tobago to come with a bill that represents the common position of Tobago. I'm listening to you now, and I'm hearing this is whatever we create, Tobagonians must continue to participate in the process.
The Chief Secretary went to the THA and passed a motion which said, let's form one united position. I agree with that. I take that to represent the position of the people of Tobago as expressed by the representatives in the THA. And nothing much has been done as yet to formulate that common position. What we were offering at the start is the willingness to bring issues like we're bringing them to you now to that process, so when they are making representation to you, those are brought in. But I want to emphasize the importance of the point that what you're doing here today is a step beyond what is even written in the Constitution to provide mechanisms by which we are all able as citizens to come and participate in the process. And that's what I mean when I talk about consensus. I don't have a naive view that every Tobagonian has to agree to every clause in the bill. I understand the way the politics works, but I'm saying there will be significant people who can come to you with things you don't know, which is why you have a joint select committee, to bring to the attention of the country, to bring to the attention of the committee, issues that should be addressed if we are to do what Chairperson Robinson said and build our democracy to take us further down the road. I just want to make the point.
Well, I agree with you on that because I thought you used the word common position as opposed to consultation.
Yes.
I think it's becoming a discussion between you and Dr. James, and I would prefer if it didn't proceed in that way, because I think Dr. James may have a few more points that he would like to make, and Dr. Mahabir also would like to make an input, and also Mr. Cummings. I would like to make one point, though, that this mechanism, and I'm sure Dr. James is fully aware of that, but this mechanism of the Joint Select Committee is part of the standing orders of the Parliament. So it is not part of the Constitution per se. So this mechanism for involving the citizens will be, the standing orders of the proposed legislature could also allow for this kind of involvement of the citizens. So that would be subsidiary legislation and not found within a bill of this nature or within the Constitution.
Chairperson Robinson, let me just remind you of the importance of history. This THA has been here since 1980. They have done nothing like what you're doing here. I have never seen an opportunity taken by this THA, either through the lawmaking provisions in the THA Act or through its normal practice, to provide for the citizens to properly participate in shaping what it is making as policy. So you can't trust that history. If you want inclusion, maybe you have to put it in the Constitution too, to mandate it. It's done in states in the USA. It's been infused into the British effort to govern themselves properly and so on. And I'm not sure, from my experience here in Tobago, that we can trust the THA as it's configured to bring this kind of element in there. So all of us as citizens should participate in shaping that sort of thing.
So then you're asking for the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago to mandate Tobago to do certain things. So,
well, that's what we're doing.
So then you're bringing back Tobago to having to depend on the central government.
No.
Is that it?
Not quite. I'm saying if we are all going to reshape our constitution to improve our democracy, there are critical things we have not been practicing here that we should put into the document, as agreed by all of us, that would strengthen that democracy, and inclusion is one of them.
I understand what you're saying.
Chairman, may I?
Just 1 second, please. Member Mahabir, then Member Cummings, and then Member Kajo, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dr. James, I want to raise an issue that is dear to both of our hearts and that would be of interest to every single person listening. And that is the acceleration of economic growth in Tobago. I am not talking about economic development because that's totally within the remit of Tobago itself, the development of its institutions. But you understand the Tobago economy better than most, in my opinion. And therefore, I want to ask you, having read the bill, is there any clause you would amend or recommend to be added so that the process of economic growth in Tobago can be accelerated? I raise this, Dr. James, because without economic independence, in my mind, there can be no other type of independence. And I, like everybody else, would like to see Tobago achieve its optimum and maximum economic potential. What is this bill missing to enable you, and I address this to you as a fellow economist?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, as you know, we've long understood that key to the growth process is the industrial restructuring mechanism that we put in place. And what I was saying earlier is that if you run the models on Trinidad and Tobago's data, like Barbados, like Jamaica, like any other island in the Caribbean, it's the same set of industries that give you the biggest bang for your growth buck, right? The same set. And in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, it's not oil and gas or the downstream manufacturing. It actually turns out to be what that group of industries that I call the capital producing sectors, education, healthcare, and so on. In fact, let me just say, to commend the government, that one of the best things I've ever heard from any government in the Caribbean is when this government made the point the other day when the Minister of Finance was doing his financial review, that he would move in the direction of turning the Couva Children's Hospital into an international healthcare service of excellence. That is what we had in mind back in 1997 when we drafted the Tobago plan and put into it the provisions for the hospital in Signal Hill to be both a supplier of healthcare to Tobagonians and to the international community through collaborative mechanisms similar to what the minister announced. So from the data of the country, the evidence is that you have to shift more to that class of, that body of industries. This is what I mean by saying you have to think of tourism in Tobago, not in terms of sea, sun and sand, but diversification of the reasons people come here.
Dr. James, I need to interject. I wanted to know whether there is any clause in the bill that we needed to amend or change to achieve the kind of acceleration that we're talking about. I raise this because I heard that there are some concerns with the Fiscal Review Commission, and I was just wondering whether the bill can remain with minor amendments and the remit of the Commission can then be to determine that the Commission will do some of the work that you're talking about. If we can think of the Commission more of a development commission as opposed to simply dispute resolution and so on.
I don't think this could be done by the Commission. I think the people's representatives in the Tobago House of Assembly and in the National Parliament must do that work. And that's the objection I have even to this commission as it is designed now. So its work is unmanageable. To do the work you are assigning the commission under this bill, it has to practically set up a whole public service for itself, just to know how to transform the national economy, define the comparative advantages of Tobago in that transformation process, and then define the investments required and monitor it and so on. It's not feasible, and then it cannot tell the Parliament in Trinidad and Tobago really what to do. So you need to change the clauses. I can point them out in my submission to you. You need to change the clauses in a way that allows for the central government to team up with the THA to define the investments required in Tobago for this purpose, not simply to provide for the cutting off of 8%, and then if the government in Trinidad feels pleased, it does one or two things. It needs to be structured in a better way in the bill, and I would want to make recommendations on how that could be done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. James, in response to my earlier question, you spoke to your response, went along the lines of equality of status. And we heard from the chairman in terms of why the definition was removed from the draft bill. That thinking in terms of equality of status, does that also include a definition of who is a Tobagonian? Is that your thinking?
No, as is true in the nation as a whole, wherever you reside and can vote, you are that. That's enough for us. Half of Trinidad's population can move to Tobago anytime you want and deal with the sociology and so on that goes with that. But no, I don't think you need to define a citizen for that purpose. It's sufficient to deal with the facts, the issues we are going to raise in the submission and clean up this and move one step beyond where we are now. As it is now, this bill is worse than the current THA Act. That's the point we're trying to make, and all the commentators before me. So we need to deal with that issue as we go forward. There are a couple, yeah? There are a couple of other points I wanted to bring out. Yeah, Ms. Kojo.
Okay, I won't be long because I want you to be able to bring your other points. But you spoke to, you made a recommendation that we place in the, that we consider for the new bill that we create systems or bodies like these so that we can engage the public. I know that I would have been a part of consultations in the past to engage the Tobago public on this matter, but it didn't come from the THA as a body, really from the Tobago Forum and the different political parties. But the recommendation you're making is not something that could be placed in the bill per se, because the business of the House is created or established by the House, so like the creation of joint select committees, your PAEC, and examining public accounts that we do at the national level. I think that that is something that we could consider on the Tobago House of Assembly level, so that you could even bring state enterprises before the House of Assembly's bodies and joint select committees and so on, but that would be in your standing orders for the House of Assembly and not in this bill or the Constitution. Yeah.
That is the way you practice it in Trinidad and Tobago today, but I have read many constitutions around the world in which the requirement that the government hold hearings for the public to be able to weigh in on particular legislation, that is commonplace in several, and we can cite some of them for your benefit if you want. But it can be done constitutionally. The thing is, if you leave it up to the THA to put it in the rules and you take their history, as I was saying, you may never get there. And at the end of the day, the key to sound policy design, one of the major reasons all across this Caribbean we have such weak development thrusts, is policy is made narrowly every year. There is no broad-based sufficient participation by the citizen in shaping policy. So we get the policy half right, depending on who is in power all the time. That needs to change, and look at the strong countries around the world and you'll see how inclusive they are with respect to policy design before you get to the parliament to vote on a policy. So I would suggest we treat with that issue. The other things that I want to raise quickly have to do with some of the mechanisms in the bill having to do with something like the People's House. It's a good idea to have the People's House. But the way it's designed in here is a problem. First of all, the business of electing 6 reps from these interest groups is going to lead to 2 problems. One is that it can't be representative of the Tobago people, and we want to preserve that representativeness in the way we do it with the constituencies. And secondly, you can't really guarantee that it will work in such a way that you will have 1 person, 1 vote, which is a preserved provision that you want when you run in your country. You don't want me to be able to be part of the tourism cluster as I can be. I can be in agriculture. I could be in pretty much, the only one of those committees I can't be in is because I'm not a trained lawyer, so I can't, maybe if you set that commitment, I can't be in that one. But I could have 5 votes to pick the 6. So that's the wrong direction in which to go. It has to be, if you want that kind of mechanism, we have to go down the road of where Switzerland went. But I would suggest right now the easiest answer is to pick 14 persons from the 7 constituencies, elect everybody, and we're not in any difficulty with respect to matters of representativeness on that side. There's another issue with respect to the way this bill is drawn up, and that is that the People's House, as it is currently designed, is really a political puppy show. The THA is able to make law and bypass it. If you give the People's House a month and they don't signal what their position is, they can't come to an agreement and so on, the THA could say, okay, or if they disagree with what the THA put forward, the THA in this bill could say, look, we're going to submit our bill to the president and let the president decide if to sign or not. And given the way the president works under instruction, you'll get that. So the THA is able to make law and ignore fundamentally the People's House. Now, what do we want a People's House for? To strengthen our democracy, to provide for oversight of the Executive Council, to do some of the scrutiny that we want of finances and checking on whether they're handling our money properly and so on. Those kinds of provisions need to be drawn up and brought in as a role for the People's House. And the THA and the People's House must pass the same version of a bill in order to make law in Tobago. It shouldn't be that the People's House could be left aside as representatives of our people, and the THA takes on itself the right to be king and commoner at the same time. Make your own law and implement it yourself. That's a king. We don't want to create any king here in Tobago, so you need to have provisions to restrain the powers of the exercise of the powers of the Executive Council, and that's what a People's House should really be designed for, and to provide mechanisms of inclusion at minimum. I'd like to make...
Dr. James,
yes.
James, sorry. Our cutoff time is
yes.
4 o'clock.
Yes.
We have 3 other persons who are here, and I know that you did indicate that you will send a submission.
Indeed.
I really have to ask if you could allow the... Yes, thank you very much.
Good.
We may try to go on a little longer, but for now, our cutoff time is 4 o'clock. But I want to thank you very much for your very interesting submissions, and we look forward as a committee to receiving the written submissions.
And let me thank you all for coming.
Thank you very kindly.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Lewis. That's Jeffrey, the G, Geoffrey, Lewis. I just have 2 quick points. With regards to equal status, will the 15 members of the House of Assembly have a say in the making of the laws for Trinidad and Tobago? One question there. Because I'm a representative for TAP, Association of Retired Persons, I have a concern with what happens with retirees, with senior citizens. We find a lot of the youth in Tobago are moving more to Trinidad to move bigger places. Are provisions being made to look after the seniors? That's my concern. How are seniors being looked after in all the changes we are about to make? So those are my two questions. That's it. I didn't give any trouble, right?
Mr.
Right.
Member Rambarat, you wanted to take that?
Thank you very much, Mr. Jeffrey, and it's nice, Mr. Lewis. It's nice to bring out all the things that we may not pay attention to. On the first issue, the legislator in Tobago will make laws for Tobago.
Trinidad and Tobago.
No, only Tobago.
Well, that's what I'm asking, but for laws for Trinidad and Tobago, laws do.
Will continue to be made by the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago.
So the 15 elected members will not have a say in the making of laws for Trinidad and Tobago?
No. The current structure will be preserved in the sense that matters are reserved in the bill exclusively for central government and through the Parliament, and those are things that will affect Trinidad and Tobago. But where there are matters relating to put it simply, Tobago running its affairs, those will be dealt with within Tobago.
No, I'm concerned about laws of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
The nation, why would not 15 elected people in Tobago have a say in the laws of Trinidad and Tobago? Not just Tobago laws,
no,
Trinidad and Tobago.
You're saying a say. Tobago will continue through the structure of the Parliament, continue to be represented in the Parliament.
Right, true.
Right. As the EBC, you know that is determined on an independent basis.
Okay, right.
And that's your first question. And on the second question really deals with not so much the bill, but the affairs of Tobago in relation to ensuring that there is provision for the appropriate skills to be available in Tobago, which, as you know, has always been a challenge. And for that reason, the THA has placed specific emphasis through scholarship programs and other means of developing the capacity of Tobago. But I'm sure that the committee will take note.
But you see, we talk about an equal opportunity, and you can't be denied by race or religion or that. Why are we being denied by age? Just because you attain a certain age does not make you incompetent to do things. And that seems to be the trend.
Well,
you all out the past there.
The chairman has pulled me up already.
Oh.
And I don't want to go there.
Sorry.
Except to say that the challenges of geriatric and elder care in Tobago are not necessarily unique to Tobago. But I'm sure the committee will take note of that particular issue, and we thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think it's Mr. Jeffrey Lewis.
Right.
You've made a very valuable point that the Tobago in the national parliament, the Tobago representatives should be commenting on national law, Trinidad and Tobago's law. Currently, you have 2 representatives in the House of Representatives, Tobago East and Tobago West. Do you recommend that there be maybe 2 senators as well in the Senate of Trinidad and Tobago from Tobago? Maybe one appointed by the government, one appointed by the independent. So you have, in addition to the 2 representatives in the House of Representatives, you also have 2 Tobago senators as mandated by the Constitution. Do you recommend that Constitution?
That would help. That would help, yes.
Okay.
You have a little larger say.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. And one from the opposition. One by the government, one by the opposition, and one by the
It could very well be, but I raise government and independence because government has 15, independence 9, and the opposition 6. Yeah. So I think it could very well be
5 Trinidadians and 1 Tobagonian.
Well, yeah, it could very well be 1-1-1. Yes, it could very well be that. But so that's a valuable suggestion. So instead of 2, you look at 3.
Chairman, my question or concern as it relates to that, if the business of the assembly or Tobago's business is now going to be handled primarily in the assembly, then shouldn't it be handled there rather than trying to send people down to... How much of your business would be handled at the Parliament if we're expanding your responsibility in Tobago?
Well, you see, even the two Tobago representatives could come and say, this is what Tobago is interested in, but they're going to be overruled by the others. Now, if we had at least 15 elected people who are, because the members of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago are saying, we want these people, 15 people, to represent our concerns. Well, you only have a little say in Tobago, you can't have no say in Trinidad. And we are forming laws to affect everybody in Trinidad and Tobago.
Good. We're on the same page. I'm a national representative, so I understand what you're saying. I understand the point that we're trying to drive home. Now, it takes me to our next question. How and who should they be elected or should they be appointed? I guess Senator Mahabir was speaking to election or appointment.
Well, in the Senate, we're all appointed. You see, so the point is, you see, I think what Mr. Lewis indicated was that there has to be Tobago representation on matters which affect both Trinidad and Tobago and in which Tobago may have an interest. We do have two chambers, and so I'm just wondering, my issue was whether it should not be placed in the law, in the Constitution, that in the Senate of Trinidad and Tobago, there should also be a minimum number of representatives. And you said that made sense. So it's appointed. Right. We have already sorted out the elected representatives, you see. It is just the appointed chamber that seems to be, in my mind, perhaps missing the mandatory Tobago representation.
Right, thank you. In the interest of time, I just wanted to make the point so it can be considered, that's all. So we don't have to deliberate now.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Thank you very much, members of the committee. My name is Vincent Nathaniel Taylor. I represent Vincent Nathaniel Taylor. I would have liked to make a more detailed presentation, but I only got this document yesterday, and I spent last night going through it. So I made some quick notes, what I considered to be housekeeping. Right? Forgive me if you don't agree with me. My first observation is the fact that you said in the bill that the Chief Secretary should have the right to sit in cabinet to discuss matters affecting Tobago, but it wasn't a right, it says he may. Now, the court has already ruled, I think may means shall. I know they arrive at that. But that, if I remember well, I think the court said may means shall. And I am saying that it should be obligatory, if I get the right word, that the chief, once you are discussing a matter for Tobago, that the chief secretary should have the right. As a matter of fact, based on what I was hearing here a while ago, I am saying we should even go further than that. Let me change that. I have always maintained that the two representatives of Tobago shall be ex officio members of the Tobago House of Assembly, so that they can go in there, sit, speak, hear what the people have to say, so when they go down in Parliament, they know exactly what they're representing, right? So we should make provision for that. And the suggestion here that...
Mr. Vincent Nathaniel Taylor.
Yes, ma'am.
You're suggesting that the two national representatives should be
ex officio members of the Tobago
House. All right, thank you.
They can speak, but they can't vote.
Okay.
All right. And the suggestion made here by Mr. Danisha, did I get your name right, sir? Mahabir? Right. That we have 3 representatives in the Senate, an independent, the government, and the opposition. That'd be fine. I'm all for that. Right? The more people to say what you want to say. I don't have a problem. I'm moving on very quickly because I understand we press here for time. You have a provision in the bill that says that the Tobago House of Assembly shall make its own laws. But who's going to administer those laws? There are no provisions for Tobagonian or the Tobago House of Assembly per se to have, well, you know, we want to separate politics from law. We understand that as far as it's practical. But if Tobago House of Assembly is going to make its own laws, I am suggesting we should have the right to administer those laws. And a quick suggestion is, while you cannot have 2 chief justices in one country, I want to suggest that we could appoint an assistant or what do you call it? An assistant chief justice, or by whatever name you want to call him, who would be responsible for Tobago. He'd be in Tobago, and he reports to the chief justice to solve that problem. You have also another provision which says, and this is something I've had problems with for the longest while. You have one of these committees that recruit people in the government service, whether it's the teaching service or the whatever service. They send out an advertisement, they recruit, people respond to the advertisement, they interview them, they go through all that is necessary, and they select a person, and then the politicians say, I ain't want to work with that person. Here was my problem with that. It's unconstitutional. If you are going to have the right to object to somebody working in the service, at the point of the interview, I would say that whatever the commission is should have the right to notify you, okay, we have gone through the process and we have 3 candidates here that we think we could select. Would you want to comment on any of these 2? I'm talking about the Prime Minister, right? Would you want to comment on any of these? Or do you have any objection to any of these 3 candidates? And if he says yes and he submits his objection, the candidate should have the right to respond to the objection of the Prime Minister. But you can't go through the process, give the person the impression that they're all right, they're qualified, and then only to learn after the recommendation of the committee that the Prime Minister objects. Now, I think if my memory serves me right, you had the case of the current DPP, where he was recommended to the government, and the then Prime Minister Manning objected and sent the matter back to the Judicial and Legal Services Commission, and they sent back the DPP, the present deputy, back to Mr. Manning and said, this is the man we select. This man is the best man for the job. And nobody can argue that he did a good job, but he's still doing a good job. Nobody can argue that. So I'm saying there must be some mechanism to give the person, you can't accuse a person because you're the Prime Minister and get away with it. That ain't right. So they must correct that. In your provision in the bill, you make provision for a police service in Tobago, headed by whom? Responsible to who? The bill doesn't say that there shall be a deputy commissioner of police stationed in Tobago responsible to the commissioner of police in Trinidad. It just says that there shall be let me read it. 47.
Mr. Taylor,
yes, ma'am.
it's not envisaged that it will be a separate police service, huh?
I understand
the
that.
National security issues are national.
But it's a police service. So are you creating 2 police services?
No.
It's 1.
Yes.
Right, and
but
I'm saying
the level of officer will be a higher level.
Okay, but you must state that. I'm saying state that in the bill.
Okay. Oh, that's the point you made.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You also left out the fire service. I didn't see any provision for the fire service in Tobago. So we have 1 fire service. Why do we treat the fire service as we treat the police service? What's the reason for that?
Mr. Taylor?
Yes, ma'am.
The fire service has noted that point that you just made, so that will be adjusted.
Right. Next point. I am no expert on economic zones or any economist. I'm not like that. But I am concerned when you set the limit for Tobago as 11 miles off the base or something like that. But in Tobago, there has been bandied about that we have 200 miles economic zone, that we have more economic zone than in Trinidad. Right? And I think that's the bone of contention. But if you're giving us 11 miles out of it, what happens to the rest? Trinidad. We need to define that, and we need to define how we're going to jointly administer the 200 miles economic zone that lies off our shores. There's a clause, I think it's clause page 16, I think it is. Let me see if I got it right. Oh, clause 16. where it talks about the presiding officer shall have the right to approve a document, and my answer is, why not the Executive Council? Why the presiding officer rather than the Executive Council? You're elevating
Mr. Taylor, can you tell us exactly what you're referring to?
I mark it down here as paid, but I think I get it. Is either page 16 or no, just now. Section 29, I think it is. Let me see if I right. I did this in a hurry last night, half sleepy, so forgive me.
You did that in a hurry. Mr. Taylor, if you did that in a hurry, I wouldn't like to see if you did it taking your time.
Believe me, last night I was very sleepy and in a hurry. The president, listen, I'm going to have to write you on that, because I don't want to waste your time now. But it's part of the bill which says that its presiding officer shall have the right to approve something passed by the House. And I'm saying, why you elevate the presiding officer over the Executive Council? Right? I'm going to write you on that. I don't want to waste your time. Right, coming back to the question of the People's House, I support that, but I don't support the structure. Why do we want to have two elections? Why do we want to elect two sets of people? I love the Senate of Trinidad and Tobago. I think it operates fine. We have had all kudos to those people who are in the Senate now and who have gone before. I think we have done a fantastic job. I don't always agree with them. I certainly have some conflict with some of my friends' position on a number of issues that you raised recently. But that's the right, that's how a Senate operates. Why do we want to have Tobago? You want to make it, I think the provision is to make the thing in confusion. Let me tell you something. All you understand how election is run here, let me give a good example. Two brothers would be on opposing side in Trinidad. They will fight, and next morning after the election, they'll go and sit down in a bar and make joke about how my side win, and that don't happen here, no. They will be enemies for life, and all they did was carry out their constitutional responsibility and pick a certain political side which is opposed to the other one. So why you want to put this People's House in that kind of a canal? That make no sense. I am saying let the president, just as you do the Senate, find a mechanism, I ain't no legal expert, find a mechanism that you use for the Senate in Trinidad and Tobago and apply the same thing here. And it worked in Trinidad for years, and I ain't see no reason why it can't work here. That's my problem with it. All right. The fiscal committee and this percentage. You know, once upon a time I used to work with NUJFW, and I remember Nathaniel Critchlow always tell us, beware of percentage argument. It is a double-edged sword. Be careful with it. Right. But here was my problem with this provision. You set up a fiscal committee to advise the government as to what kind of allocation you should make for the proper running of the Tobago House of Assembly. But you set a limit, 8%. What's that? It's either you have a committee to advise and the committee will come up, talk to everybody and come up with a figure, or you have 8%. You can't have both. It don't make sense. Those are my respectful submission, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor, Member Rambarat will answer or respond to most of the issues that you've raised. But before he does that, can I just be for clarification, there is at page 13 of the bill.
This bill, right?
It is under chapter 11A, and it is clause 18 or 16? All right, it's clause 18.
Page 13, you say?
Okay, it might be easier to find. It is clause 18, subclause 16.
18, subclause 16, yes.
Right, where it says that the presiding officer shall sign the certificate.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you were talking about? That is a normal parliamentary procedure, because the presiding officer or the speaker in the House of Representatives has to sign the certificate when it relates to money bills. So it's normal, and the speaker has to sign the certificate certifying for all bills that this is actually the bill that was passed by the House.
Well, that's the purpose of it.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
So, Member Rambarat, please.
Mr. Taylor, thank you very much. And I hope if I ever run in Tobago, we're on the same side. So just to quickly address some of what you raised, very important submissions. The matter of MPs being ex officio, I think it is something that should be considered.
Thank you.
And it is, as you say, right to speak, but not to vote.
That's right.
And it is not unusual, because the current arrangements in the Parliament, a minister who, like myself, is a senator, can speak in the lower house, but in a very specific manner, without having the right to vote.
Okay.
On the issue of the representatives in the Senate, again, there seem to be supportive views here. My own view is that I do not wish to ever to constrain the Prime Minister in the exercise of his discretion. May the best 15, or in the case of the President, the best 9. But I think that that it is something that I've heard support for. The issue of the judiciary, one of the constraints in Tobago, as you know, in the administration of justice, is the fact that Tobago, until recently, never had dedicated magistrates or judges. And the judges came here every other month and sat, when they came here, in both civil and criminal jurisdictions.
Yes, they do.
And that is something that ought to be addressed in terms of the Parliament. The government just successfully passed legislation to create a criminal jurisdiction, a defined criminal jurisdiction within the judiciary. Before that, a family jurisdiction was created.
Yes, sir. If you don't mind, sir.
Yeah.
I think I had cause to write the Chief Justice some time ago and says, you have set up a family court in Trinidad.
Yeah.
But if people in Tobago have a family court matter, they have to go to Trinidad.
Well,
that makes no sense.
It's a matter that the purpose of this consultation is to hear and advance suggestions to deal with that, and a Tobago division may be some way of solving that matter. In relation to the Service Commission, this bill seeks to create a Tobago Service Commission. That's the first thing, but it doesn't seek to create new powers of the Commission, and it does not currently interfere with the Prime Minister's power of veto. The power of veto is something that is exercised in relation to specific appointments across commissions. And again, that is something that if we get to that point, it would be in a different discussion. Right. The point about the police service, there is in the schedule to the bill reserves certain.
It only says policing.
Well, there is a line there which says national security. These are the powers which are matters for which, on the proposed fourth schedule, the matters for which the central government shall have exclusive lawmaking powers. And at number 9, you would see national security, except that internal policing shall be under the jurisdiction of the Tobago Island government.
And that's very vague.
Right? And this bill, being an amendment to the Constitution, this bill will not set out the details of that. There is legislation under which the Commissioner of Police exercises his powers. For example, the Supplemental Police Act. So there is other legislation where the police commissioner would be able to address the issue of internal policing in Tobago. And again, using the model, in Trinidad as it is now, we have municipal policing. So in the cities of Port of Spain and San Fernando, And the government, again, has just made some further steps toward beefing up the numbers in those municipal bodies. So we have the national police, and we do have municipal police officers. And those things are a matter for the Commission of Police. In relation to the matter of the economic zone, again, that is something that falls to part of in the provision dealing with the Fiscal Commission. You would see where the Fiscal Commission, among the things it must do, the Fiscal Commission is dealt with at the proposed 141 AD subsection 3. And you would see that part of what they have to do is to develop a regime for sharing the revenue obtained from the marine resources in the waters comprising each island and the maritime boundaries, superadjacent airspace, and telecommunications. Now, the matter again of defining exclusive economic zone goes beyond the remit of this committee. It would require the involvement of several technocrats, because it is something that has a particular mechanism for determining. The People's House, your observation are observations which have been shared by members of this committee when we've met. I pointed to it earlier when I was talking to Dr. James about how it will work, and that is something we know is on the front burner in terms of making that work. And again, the Fiscal Commission is something that we recognize requires a lot of thought in terms of Dr. James himself raised some concerns in terms of the bureaucracy that must support that, and to use the expression, having to create another public service. But that is an important element, a key element in the working of this relationship, and the committee will have to give consideration to all the views expressed in relation to the Fiscal Commission. I thank you very much for your submission.
Thank you, sir. In leaving, I just want to say, in respect of the Prime Minister's veto, I would quote what's his name? Mr. Herbert Volney. The illegality of an antiquity of an illegal act doesn't make it legal. Thank you.
Mr. Taylor, please.
Mr. Taylor, just a minute, please.
I have one question.
Member Kajo and Member Crease would like to engage you, and Member De Freitas. And may I take this opportunity to say, it is 4 o'clock, we're supposed to end at 4. However, we will go on to 5 o'clock, and I will take a 5-minute break when after we have engaged Mr. Taylor. We'll take a 5-minute break and then resume. Is that all right with everybody? Yes. The audience? Yes. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Taylor, right.
Yes.
Good afternoon. I wanted to get your views on the point that you made relating to the two ex officio members from the Parliament to the Tobago House of Assembly, because it brings me back to my line of questions that I brought up before but didn't complete. Shouldn't the same thing apply to Trinidad, where you have a member of the House of Assembly in the Parliament, in the House of Representatives, and one even in the Senate, speaking on behalf of the Assembly but cannot vote?
In the Assembly?
Yes.
Well,
because if the Assembly is discussing matters that are related to national interest, and you're going to have the members from the national MPs, right, be a part of the Assembly debate, then when the National Parliament is debating matters relating to the House of Assembly, then the House of Assembly should be able to have 2 people there. Also, let's take, and I'm looking at it from this perspective, what if you have a situation where the party in power in Tobago is not represented in any way in Trinidad, not even through its members of Parliament? Yeah? Therefore, you can't depend on the 2 MPs from Tobago, because their party would not have been represented in the Tobago House of Assembly. We've had that in the past. how do we treat with that matter? How do we ensure that the Tobago House of Assembly's position stands in the House of the Parliament in its debate also? So I'm asking if that same recommendation that you made in having the ex officio members speak in the House of Assembly but can't vote, you can have representatives of the House of Assembly assigned to the Parliament as to when the Parliament has to deliberate on Tobago House of Assembly matters to give their view.
I am not a lawyer, but I'm going to attempt to answer your question. I think the clause should read something like this: in the event that the two representatives of Tobago does not represent the views of the governance of Tobago, then the governance of Tobago, the Tobago House of Assembly, shall have the right to send a representative or two representatives who are ex officio members of the House. That's how I would solve that problem.
Just wanted to jump in at this point because in terms of the structure and the idea of the ex officio, I honestly thought that when you recommended it, the thing is that when you have representatives from Tobago, they represent all of Tobago, East and West. So they sit in the Parliament. So there's no need for an assembly, regardless of difference in party, to be in the Parliament, because the representatives, whether they're from one party, which is different from the government, at the end of the day, that is who Tobago chose to represent them. The idea of the ex officio, which is the parliamentarians who have been chosen, coming to the House of Assembly, I thought that that might have been a good idea because there are national issues that are being dealt with in the Parliament that the Assembly may want to have sight of, and therefore it did not need to be put into the bill because the standing orders of the Assembly would allow for that. All it requires is a section of the standing orders to be put in to allow the two representatives, whoever they may be, to come into the Assembly to either answer questions if they happen to be members of the Cabinet or to make statements. So it's a simple matter of adjusting the standing orders to say something like representatives' questions or representative statements. Of course, it would have to be robust enough to take into account the fact that Member Kujo just said, where you can have representatives who are not in the Cabinet. So it would read something to the account, to the, where the representatives who are from Tobago are members of the Cabinet, there will be representatives' questions and the ability to make representative statements in the House of Assembly. And of course, therefore, you have that connectivity between the two being maintained.
Ma'am, do I understand your question? You're suggesting that instead of having the two parliamentarians for Tobago, the ex officio members of the Tobago House of Assembly, that is the other way around? That's what you're saying?
One of the ways you represent that ex officio thing that you want is that you have your amended standing orders to allow for either one, representative's questions, or a representative being allowed to make a statement. I'm not sure about the debate aspect of it. That would have to be fleshed out at the level of the House of Assembly by way of the standing orders. You were suggesting that to be put into the bill. What I'm saying is that it just needs to be an amendment to the standing orders of the House of Assembly to allow that. Because in the Parliament in Trinidad, it's not in the Constitution. For movement between the houses is actually in the standing orders. So those who are not ministers in the national parliament do not move between the houses, but those that are would move between the houses. So a minister can answer questions in the House if he comes from the Senate, or he could enter debates in the House if he comes from the Senate. But, for example, anybody who's not a minister in the Senate does not go down to the House to get into debates and stuff like that. But that's just in the standing orders. That's not actually part of the Constitution,
right,
as far as I remember.
I understand. Let me ask a question.
Okay, they're saying it's in the Constitution, yes. So
if you have an issue being raised in Trinidad by a particular minister or ministry that affects Tobago, and you're suggesting, if I get you right, that the minister can be asked to come to the Tobago House of Assembly, you make the amendment to the standing orders and answer questions, that's what you're saying? But what if he don't come? What if he's opposed to the people in Tobago and you send a request for him to come?
It's the same if a minister is asked a question in the Parliament and they don't answer. There's provisions for that.
All I'm saying is that the two representatives for Tobago, the parliamentarian, be given the right to come in the House and speak, but they can't vote. I think that's the simpler way to solve the problem. I don't know. I'm not an expert.
Mr. Taylor, I think Member De Freitas has conceded that you might be correct.
Thank you.
Even though you're not a lawyer. Member Crease.
I understood you to be saying that the second election for the other house, right, it's probably too divisive in small island state.
It is. Tobago.
So I have two questions. One, what do you think of the overall numbers, the spread? Is about 60,000 Tobagonians we keep hearing, and the level of political representation we are about to engage in, you're comfortable with that ratio?
Yeah, given the national ratio, yeah. I have no problem.
Okay. My second question, because I think you indicated that you would prefer to have presidential appointments, just like the Senate in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes.
The sectors that are identified, are you comfortable with the sectors identified? I would just call them out to refresh your memory. Commercial and business sector, tourism sector, agricultural sector, environmental sector.
Could you
mic.
Into the mic.
Yeah, sorry about that. All right, so I'll call them again. There are 6 of them. Commercial and business sector, the tourism sector, the agricultural sector, the environmental sector, the services sector, and the legal sector. Are you comfortable with those 6 sectors?
No,
Whoever
sir,
brings
if
them
you
in.
watch my notes, I put a big question mark by that.
So could you quickly indicate what your preferences would be?
The commercial and business sector and the tourism sector and the agricultural sector, they're all tied into one. So you're giving them 3 bites at the cherry?
And I wear another cap, so you would forgive me. I didn't see the credit unions there.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying what the Assembly has to do is create a list of organizations that serve Tobago. And from time to time, you make choice from, you can't choose everybody at the same time. There must be some mechanism in which you can choose 5 or 6 people. I don't know.
But I want to suggest that if we go with your model of letting it be presidential appointments, that we leave it to the discretion of the president. In other words, we give him the number and allow him to deal with him or her to deal with the spread. And I'm saying that because I'm always wary of things being institutionalized in law, being named, and then this situation goes into a flux and some other sector emerges and they're underrepresented, and we find ourselves having to lobby Parliament to get that corrected.
And
I'm thinking of the
don't forget that.
right, and I'm thinking of the early days of Tutor, I think it was, that underwent that problem where some other union was in the law and you had to get Parliament to intervene on what should have been a matter settled through procedure. So, you know, your response on that, whether we should name the sectors.
Well, as I said, I'm not a lawyer. So I leave it to the experts to come up with a solution to that problem. But the election part, no, that's confusion. Not in Tobago. That's confusion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Taylor.
That's a new one. All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much on that.
So now we'll just take a 5-minute break and then we'll resume. Thank you.
Qualifying persons in Trinidad and Tobago voted for the first time in what could be seen as a general election on Saturday, 7th February 1925. It was in the period after this that the call for inclusive and representative governance was made. On July 1st, 1946, nationals, including citizens in Tobago, went to the polls in a historic election in which every national, 21 years and over, had the right to vote for the representative of their choice. Tobago was the smallest of 9 constituencies in 1946, with only 11,509 voters. However, Tobagonians were very active in the democratic process, as it had the largest turnout of 73.6% of the 9 constituencies. The campaigning was vigorous and exciting, with candidates such as the popular Alfonso Filbert Theophilus James, a labor contractor, who was the Tobago representative for the British Empire Workers' and Citizens' Home Rule Party, the same party of Tubal Uriah Buzz Butler, while Raymond Percival Hamill Smith, a barrister at law, was his closest opponent. He represented the Progressive Democratic Party. In all, there were 6 candidates that year, vying for the single Tobago seat. Mrs. Jerusha Cunningham of Moriah recounted the atmosphere at that time.
There were times in the early of APT James and all those men, I had known them as, you know, carrying on election. And I don't know if you all remember one, Britain Stewart and all those men who used to involve much about it. Along with James, they were friends. We used to follow him and listen to his meetings and who he chose to vote and a lot of crowd and so on, who choose to argue much on his side and the other side.
Mrs. Cunningham recalled that in those days, voting took place at private homes, and over the years, it slowly graduated to what it is today.
Well, they used to vote under the house and so on, and then finally, the final phase, well, after the new school was built at Moriah, everybody started to go down there. The main center was at Moriah Government. As it was now, you know. You sit down, whatever we have now down there, it's a new brand school, you know. So the old school where they used to vote. The juvenile, we used to vote in the juvenile first, and then these youths now come over to the new brand school.
In those days, the average citizen was not allowed to work as election officials at polling booths.
Civil servants and teachers, they were the ones who mingling up with the voting, not like today. Today is more direct and prominent and straightforward, but in those days, because I had a brother, my only brother, he used to work, and when he done it, scrub his fingers, scrub off the ink, because they were with it, so they couldn't be mindful of voting. But it was only government servants.
Mrs. Cunningham reminisced on those early years of voting, saying they were good times to remember.
It was glorious in those years, you know, the yeye and the nene and the tra-la-la-la on the road and the camp and the discussion and who you want to and so on. So it was a grand time in those years.
The 1946 elections in this country was a single significant turning point in the progress towards full democracy in Trinidad and Tobago. Elections in Trinidad and Tobago are always an exciting time, and the 1946 elections, which were the first under universal adult suffrage, did not disappoint. Persons from all ages and walks of life were involved in the campaigning leading up to the poll day. And it was not uncommon for Tobagonians to come to Trinidad to further their personal development. In the 1930s, Trinidad had the busiest port in the British West Indies. It would have been here that Mr. William Archie, a Tobagonian seeking his future, would have entered Trinidad for the first time. Mr. Archie shared his memories of the activities he took part in during the days before the 1946 election day.
I was born in Tobago, went to Trinidad to at least elevate yourself because you couldn't get all the amenities here. So we went off to Trinidad. Then the war in 39, I think September 39, and there onwards, well, as youngsters, we got involved in this voting process. We used to ride bicycles all through Belmont and all the places there. Camping, and then as boys, you're having fun. You would ride to Diego Martin, all those places, you would be Blue Basin, and well, having fun.
Coming out of a period of struggle for better living conditions for citizens in the Crown colonies of the Caribbean and the fight for universal adult suffrage in Trinidad and Tobago, the 95-year-old Mr. Archie said although many of his friends were not interested in voting, he gladly accepted the opportunity.
It's the first chance you have to vote without having property and all that stuff. So you were excited. And at least you were excited. You were excited because when you hear big names like Albert, go home, Bertie, go home, Big Belly, go home, I think Pat Sullivan was in that season, Patrick Sullivan. But they used to come Belmont to campaign at St. Margaret's.
Okay, we'll be starting again in just a couple minutes. And so if there's anyone else who would like to make comments to the committee, we have the 4 front chairs empty and waiting for you. So if you could indicate now, you can take your seat at the table. And then we will continue as soon as the committee starts again. So feel free to come and join us.
Trinidad and Tobago is a twin island state. Recently, a delegation from the Tobago House of Assembly visited the office of the Parliament. Presiding officer of the Tobago House of Assembly, Dr. Denise Sawyerfat Angus, led the official visit. Also part of this delegation were Clerk of the Assembly, Mrs. Sharon Irvin Comby, and 7 other members of staff that are key to the operations of the Assembly legislature. A courtesy call was paid to Senator the Honorable Christine Kangaloo, President of the Senate. The visiting presiding officer sat down for an interview with the Parliament channel. What is the purpose of your visit to the office of the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago?
The purpose of the visit to the Parliament, the Tobago delegation from the Assembly legislature, is a means to strengthening partnerships and also expanding the vision. The team that we brought represented most aspects of personnel who need to carry out the functions of the Assembly legislature. And so we brought the Hansard unit so they can connect and identify with the Hansard unit at Parliament to understand where they are and to see perhaps where we need to go in the future. Likewise, we've had our IT unit, or the IT person, the community outreach programs, research, librarian, all of these persons, and of course, including the clerk of the assembly. And we are here to see the parliament, to understand where you came from, to where you are now, and of course, where you are headed in the future. And therefore, how do we, as the Tobago House of Assembly legislature, learn from what you are doing?
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to resume shortly. Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. We're going to resume the submissions. I'd like to indicate that we are trying to end at 5, and it is now 25 past 5. We have 25 past 4, and we do have 3 members of the audience in front of us. May I ask if there are any other people who would have wanted to make submissions? I'm seeing 2 people. Is it 1 or 2 people? 1 person. Can you come forward, please? But I really am insisting that we have to end at 5 o'clock. Okay, so please go ahead.
Good afternoon to the head table.
Good afternoon.
My name is Ottman Drysdale. I'm from Parliamentary, but I'm living at Plymouth for the past 30 years. And my question is very simple. I will not be long. Why, I don't know which one on the head table would like to answer this question. Why is it Tobago is being treated from inception this unequal and uneven way? But everybody here agree that we should be side by side. But for all my years growing up, I only see Tobago is being given a fish every day rather than be taught to fishing. Am I lying? Am I lying? Anybody from the head table? Nobody, they wouldn't answer that. No, I know that.
Could I answer him? Yes.
Mr. Drysdale, apparently, Member Mahabir is going to brave the waters.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Why is it Tobago is being given a fish for all these years, every day, rather than teaching us to fishing? Because we didn't ask to be in that position, you know. The English people and them did it. Put the onus on Trinidad to take care of little Tobago. The reason why I asked that question, the more things change, the more they remain the same. Am I lying?
Right.
Not lying at all.
Okay. Mr. Drysdale, both questions. Member Mahabir will answer. But I just want to say, as someone married to a Tobagonian, we love you.
Yes, but I want you to teach me to fishing.
All right. Anyway, on that note, Member Mahabir.
Yeah.
Mr. Drysdale, you have raised a question about the economic development of Tobago. It was advanced earlier to my colleague, Mr. Valence James, that without accelerating the pace of economic development, there really can be no genuine independence. The issue that I have is that while we cannot be held liable for the initial arrangements of the 1890s, that was the arrangements amongst the colonial powers, what we have is an opportunity today. The first time I myself was apprised, I'll give you a little bit of historical background, of the unique situation in Tobago was when former President A.N.R. Robinson visited my high school in Chaguanas, and he addressed us as high school students on the need for Tobago internal self-government. That's the first time I, as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, became aware of the unique problems. It was because of the dialogue. The great A.N.R. Robinson came to speak to a group of school children. So I think from then to now, 76 to now, we have been making some strides, not as fast as you would like the pace to go. But we did pass the THA Act somewhere in 1996. That was the first act that I debated in Parliament when I was a young independent. What I'm saying is that we do need to look at what the economic structure in Tobago is now. What are the constraints which would prevent a Tobago from generating per capita incomes that are, say, in accord with some of the more developed island economies in the world, Mauritius, for example. And once we identify those with the dialogue that we are having, you could be sure, and with the expertise you have in Tobago, you have a tremendous amount of economic expertise in Tobago. Once we understand what the constraints are in the law, what the constraints are in the arrangements, and with your own initiative, we can be sure that the pace will accelerate from now on. But I think your concern is it is not moving fast enough. But I think that we are moving a stage beyond the THA Act. We are moving to a stage where there would be something hopefully superior, which will result. How is it going to result? As the chairman indicated, the PSIP of Trinidad and Tobago includes a Tobago component. Once we are able to collaborate on the development projects that Tobago requires for its own accelerated pace of development, we will over time see some tangible results. Let's hope it's in our lifetime. As you know, economies do not grow quickly. If we can get 3% per annum, but we can get it over 10 continuous years, you would find that the income levels of Tobagonians will rise. So while I accept the fact that the per capita incomes in Tobago should be higher, what I think everyone should be aware of is that there is now a commitment to ensure that whatever the constraints are, right now we could only deal with the legislative constraints. If we can find out what the other constraints are, I am sure there is total and full commitment on the part of the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago to give you the kind of economic development that you can want. But development does not occur with talk alone. Development occurs with projects on the ground. Dr. James will tell you that. You must have the projects. You must have the infrastructure. You must have the wherewithal for industries to grow. We are looking into what the constraints are. For example, I'll tell you, and I'll close. I don't know right now, and I hope the current assembly will give me the list of projects which, if implemented over the next 5 years, will have a direct impact on the rate of economic growth. I would like to see what those projects are. And once we see what the projects are, you could be sure that they will appear in the PSIP as prepared by the Honorable Minister of Planning. So I don't think there's anything sinister at all in the arrangements, but every economy has a history, and the history has not been, of course, one conducive to economic growth. Let us chart the path forward.
I do not want to sound as doom and gloom, but sir, I grew up in this state here, politically, from the 1966 election. I better don't go there because that will send me in, that will send the meeting in Hawaii.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is that it, Mr. Drysdale?
Yes, Mr. Drysdale. I don't want to go down into that. I shouldn't really say those words because it is not a nice thing when you grow up in something and see it happening in your very eyes every day and no change. That's why I said more things change, the more they remain the same. What could change Tobago's acceptance from Trinidad? by having two representatives. Anytime Tobago has to vote in an election where Tobago and Trinidad is, Tobago has no say. We has no say. Tobago have no say in nothing.
You understand your concern, Mr. Drysdale, and this bill hopefully will deal with your concern. All right. Is there any other issue you wanted to raise?
No, I won't
go there.
No.
All right. Thank you very much for your contribution. Yes, sir.
A very pleasant good afternoon, Madam Chair, rest of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to make a presentation here. I would like to see...
Remember to give us your
Oh,
name.
sorry. Bindley Benjamin.
Yes, Mr.
Retired public officer, and I'm representing concerned citizens of Tobago, a few concerned citizens of Tobago. Two of the things I'd like to see included in the bill is a system of accountability, financial system. I am all for autonomy, but I'm saying that with autonomy, there must be accountability. I am recommending these two things because of the past. I'm not pelting any stones here this afternoon, but I'm just looking at the figures as they appeared from the records of the THA. I'm recommending, first of all, an Office of Contractor General on the basis of the Jamaican model. And of course, I'm asking you all to look and see what the Jamaican model is. I don't want to read it here now because time is of the essence. Because some of the things that happened in Tobago over the past 18 years, question of cost overruns on projects. We have, for instance, the Shore Park Cultural Complex starting at 100 million, cost overrun of over $800 million. The financial complex where we are, cost overrun $100 million. The Scarborough Library, $200 million cost overrun. The Charlottesville Fishing Facility, $7 million cost overrun. The Scarborough Hospital, $700 million cost overrun. The hospital laundry, $10 million cost overrun.
Benjamin, those figures are from where?
The THA records. I should explain. I'm a retired public officer. I worked for years in the Auditor General Department. I spent most of my public...
What official document are they from?
The financial statements of the THA.
For what year?
Between 2002 and 2015. And I even went up to 2016 in some cases.
Document?
Financial statements laid in the House by the THA.
Okay.
At the end of the financial year, they laid the House.
No, I understand
yes.
what you're saying. I'm just trying to make
yes.
sure that what you're of the document that you're quoting from. You have the document with you?
I wouldn't have all those documents here with me, but I have a document which I want to present to you.
Okay.
Right? What I'm saying,
thanks very much.
Because of that background, the Contractor General would be able to see everything, oversee contracts as is done in Jamaica to ensure that there is no cost overrun because, I mean, people in Tobago have been complaining. You are talking about more autonomy. They're going to say they're going to be saying that it's going to be more, well, financial impropriety. Because I mean, when you look at when you look at the Shore Park Cultural Complex, it isn't even finally completed yet, and it's gone to $1 billion from 100 million. We have to be more conscious of taxpayers' money. I am a taxpayer myself, and people are complaining that you're not getting justice in terms of the monies that we get in Tobago. Secondly, I want to present the question of Auditor General report. I saw the the Trinidad Express today.
So, Mr. Benjamin, how does that relate to the specific bill that's before us?
I just want to make sure that the headline says the Auditor General's report 2018.
Okay. Right, I understand that,
yes.
But I'm saying, remember what we're here today to deal with is the bill before us. tell me what is your recommendation in relation to that specific issue?
Well, my recommendation in respect of the Auditor General report, there have been negative reports on the Tobago House of Assembly from 2002 to 2006.
In relation
to the bill, I'm recommending that there be an Office of Public Defender to be put into the bill. This public defender would have oversight of the things that are done by the Executive Council. For instance, Executive Council notes, because what is happening, the Auditor General in his reports have been mentioning that several documents have not been presented, bank accounts have not been reconciled, and we know the problem of bank accounts these days in terms of what is happening with online banking. And it is very painful to see that, I mean, when these reports are completed, they go to the President of the Senate, Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Minister of Finance, and nothing from 2002 to now. You have heard nothing coming about the negative reports at the House of Assembly. And I mean, you're wondering as a Tobagonian and a taxpayer, why isn't anything being done? Negative reports, in some cases, the reports are so negative that there's a disclaimer. There were 2 disclaimers so far. That means they could not report, Auditor General could not report because of the shambles in which those reports were made. So I'm saying, if we are talking about more autonomy for Tobago, there has to be in the bill a system of accountability to ensure that public monies are properly spent and accounted for. I would like to get any questions.
Mr. Benjamin, let me just indicate that under the Parliament, the constitutionally established PAC and the PAEC of the Parliament, they examine those reports that come from the Auditor General's office in relation to all ministries, in relation to the THA, in relation to state enterprises. So that is the mechanism that is in place to deal with those issues.
Well, I am saying, I'm recommending that if you're looking at recommendations for a better governance of Tobago, I am recommending very strongly, because I'm quite familiar with the PAC and the various committees of Parliament that, you know, see about this thing. But nothing happens. There are no consequences because things are happening. I remembered recently when the CAL was bought, the CAL board was brought before the Public Accounts Committee, and they refused to send documents. And now the Board of Inland Revenue are refusing to give information to the Auditor General. What I'm saying, for there to be a system of accountability, that system of accountability should be in the bill. So I'm recommending a contractor general based on the Jamaican model, and I'm recommending a public office of public defender, which will be able to see not only about the accounting. Discrimination is the order of the day in Tobago. It happened over the years. It's still happening, and every Tobagoan knows that, because they will tell you, look, I can't say anything because I had to eat a food, right? We have to live in a country where you feel safe to say what you have to say and don't have to hide because of the color of the shirt you're wearing. So I'm going to give you the documents, Office of Contractor General, and the system of accounting under for the public defender.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Member Kajo, Member Kreese, Member Rambarat, and Member Mahabir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Now, Mr. Benjamin would have made a significant number.
Just indicate that we only have 15 minutes. We have these 3 gentlemen before us, so
yeah. Based on the allegations and the concerns that Mr. Benjamin has, I want to know if he's recommending the same sort of arrangement on a national scale, which is the public defender nationally, or is it that you're only concerned about a public defender for Tobago? And I just want to say I really look forward to your recommendations and the clauses that you want us to look at? Thanks.
I am recommending a public defender for Tobago, but eventually, I think this should go national.
Mr. James, Mr. Benjamin, thank you very much for your submissions. I just want to make a few quick points. The first is that in relation to the Contractor General, we have the procurement and disposal of property, public property legislation, and that is modeled on the Jamaican legislation. Mm-hmm. It is going to be fully proclaimed once the government establishes that the capacity and the resources are in place. In fact, His Excellency the President made appointments to the board, and that will apply, and that will solve some of the procurement issues that have been raised. In addition to which, we have a system of auditing and accountability in the country that is based on an existing legislative framework. It may be that the legislation is falls short of what is required, and a few important elements of that is the Parliament. The chairman referred to some of the joint select committees. The Parliament has oversight. You have several committees that has oversight, and most importantly, the Auditor General. This bill preserves the existence of the Auditor General as a function of central government. But the Auditor General, I think what you are criticizing is maybe the inadequacy of the existing legislation and the ineffectiveness of the Auditor General's work. And those are matters that do not fall within the context of this bill, but we should take note of it in the consideration of other things. In relation to the Office of Public Defender, again, my colleague, Member Kojo asked the question. I think that the Attorney General has signaled that there is going to be an office of that nature, and it would not be specific to Tobago. It will apply to the unitary state of Trinidad and Tobago. But your issues are not unique to Tobago. I'll give you an example. There was something in Trinidad and Tobago called life sport, and when the Auditor General rendered the report on the Ministry of Sport and flagged life sport, the Auditor General said, and that may have been the 2013 or 2014 report, the Auditor General said in relation to a program that cost about $400 million, the Auditor General could not find the documents to conduct a full audit, and that is written into the report. And I myself was concerned that you could have that expenditure and the Auditor General does not have the documents to make a statement. So it applies in Trinidad, in Tobago, and in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.
Now, if I may just respond, if I'm allowed to.
We only have 10 more minutes, and we have 3 other people
Very
who
well.
want to submit.
Okay.
Yes, a quick question. It follows on what Member Rambarat was speaking to. Would you agree with me that the substantive legislation in each case for the other entities you referred to, but in this particular case with regard to the THA, that there should be, the legislation should be drafted in such a way as to deal with penalties for failure to supply documentation? I'm not talking about necessarily wrongdoing, but the documentation to facilitate the investigation of the Auditor General or whoever else, that failure to provide that of itself should be a crime, dealt with within the ambit of the legislation.
I'm in total agreement with you because the details of my submission for the details of the submission, includes penalties, because what has been happening, as I said, documents have not been provided in most cases.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, Chairman, may I come in now? Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Mr. Benjamin, I think you have raised a critical point, and that is funds, public funds, ought to be allocated for particular purposes. So when there is a transfer from one to the other, there is a requirement that the receiver must give a good account of how the funds were used. I don't know when the last time when was the last time that the THA submitted its audited financial accounts? I haven't seen one in quite a while. But what I would like to propose to you is this. There is a proposal in the bill for a transfer of now up to 8%. And I raised it with another person who made a contribution. Should we, in your opinion, with your experience in the public service, should we put in law that these transfers will be contingent upon the timely presentation of the audited financial reports, so that the people of Tobago will know that their funds are being well used, it has been audited, and the central government will know the funds are used for the purposes designated. And in that way, we would then be able to know that economic growth in Tobago will not be stymied on account of the misuse of funds.
Before you answer that, Mr. Benjamin, I just want to put on the table that there is a situation subsisting with not only the THA, who I understand they have submitted some of their outstanding accounts, but of course it depends on the work of the Auditor General. So, and there is also a situation subsisting with ministries, with state enterprises, and so on. So I don't want anybody to feel that this is a situation that is singular to the THA. It is a national situation where state enterprises are way behind in terms of their audited accounts, where ministries are also in a similar situation. And remember, even though at some time the government had indicated that private auditors could be used to audit state enterprises and so on, the Auditor General still has to sign off on these audited accounts. So it is not a situation that is only in which the THA alone finds itself. But remember that the Auditor General is the only official auditor of the accounts of the government of Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, what I'm saying, Madam Chair, is that the situation is that the THA is the largest employer in Tobago. Almost everybody depends on the THA to eat a bread, to eat a food. And as a result of that, we are saying a system of accountability, including the Auditor General doing his audit, must be supplemented. Auditor General should be supplemented and complemented by the public defender, so that punitive action could be taken against persons when they break the regulations.
We understand that point. Could we move on, please? Could we move on, please? We only have 10 more minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Benjamin.
Thank you.
And you said that you're going to submit something in writing. Yes, could you submit them to us, please? Mr. Vidal. Mr. Vidal, we have 5 minutes, and we have 2 other people.
Thank you. I will take 2 minutes. Madam Chairman, welcome to Tobago and your team. I have been in Tobago for the last 2 years, and I suppose it can be said, the old saying is that...
Mr. Vidal, could you give us your full name? I know you, but...
Yes.
Yeah,
I am Reginald Vidal. I'm chairman of the Dr. Eric Williams Memorial Committee. I've been in Tobago for the last 2 years, of course, observing as I reside. And it is always said that, you know, cockroach have no place in foul business. But I live in Tobago, and the interests of Tobago is mine, as it is when I was in Trinidad. 1962, when we became an independent nation, this year we would be 56 years, and we would be 42 years a republic. under the instrumentality of the nation's first chief minister, premier, prime minister, and father of the nation, Dr. Eric Eustace Williams. Tobago has never been left back insofar as the development of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago is concerned. What I'm hearing coming out of the deliberations this afternoon is a concern of Tobagonians for a more improved contribution by the central government towards their way of life in all aspects. They need a stronger bond between Trinidad and Tobago, their big brother, and their small sister. There need to be that revised budgetary allocation so that Tobagonians would not feel neglected or left back. So this consultation this afternoon is to open the awareness, as far as I am concerned, with central government in treating with the people of Tobago in a more improved fashion. They need to give Tobago more autonomy in terms of, for instance, the sea bridge and the air bridge.
Mr. Vidal, you circumscribed yourself to 2 minutes. The 2 minutes is really up. Do you have any recommendations, please?
Yes, I have two recommendations. I have one. One is that the assemblyman is no longer no longer secretary. It should be assemblyman or assemblywoman. And I would like that the chief secretary now be termed the premier and not chief secretary. I would also like that in terms of the terms of the chief secretary, it should be 2 terms, and then he would step down and he would return if he is so elected to return to the chief secretary's position. But they should have that 2-year, and then after that, you would have a step down for a year, and perhaps the Russian model with Putin. I will close on that. And I want to say that all Tobago, in my estimation, needs is not a government of Tobago, but it needs to have an improved status with the Trinidad and Tobago central government. Give Tobago what it needs. Give it what it needs for its development. Thank you.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. Vidal. Yes, sir. On your mic, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman. All protocol observed. I am Conrad James. I represent the concerns of the citizens of the island. Having briefly perused the constitutional document, I observed that there is no provision for settling disputes in the island of Trinidad and Tobago.
Talking about disputes, the financial disputes.
I'm talking about
generally.
General dispute. I'm talking about when there is conflicts between the islands and conflicts among the clause of the Constitution, so the sections of the Constitution as it relates to the development or performance of any duties or responsibilities as pertain to the Constitution. And I would like to see that there are mechanisms in place for settling dispute. Where a Constitution exists without mechanism for settling disputes, it creates constitutional crisis or crises, which will further lead to amendment of the Constitution. And as I see it, it maybe have some difficulty in doing it, except both houses come together and resolve it. Okay, so my recommendation would simply be to have, where dispute between the islands are concerned, it's settled either by treaty or United Nations or another forum, independent body for settling disputes.
Thank you. That's it?
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Jing. Yeah?
There is the other issue of, I observe here this bill will be specially entrenched. My recommendation is that the entire bill should not be entrenched. Given the situation in the country, the political situation and climate between Trinidad and Tobago, entrenching the entire bill pose serious problems to have changes. You could look at the situation with financial bills. Should require simple majority. That's an example which should require simple majority to change rather than the special majority.
So you're suggesting that the bill not require a special majority?
I'm suggesting that not the entire bill. There should be specially entrenched clauses in many aspects, but in aspects which require daily operations for the good governance of the country and efficient development, it should have a simple majority to some of the clauses or sections in the Constitution. The legal expert could look at it, and you all as a body and get some other inputs from its members and deal with it because of the situation. Later on, it could create further problems. The situation with the Tobago House, where in the both houses of Parliament and where the Tobago House does not approve or yet to approve a legislation, and that legislation is sent to from the Tobago House of Assembly to the President for approval. Without the Tobago, the second house or the Tobago, the People's House, making a decision on it or voting on the bill is creating a case for crisis and constitutional problems. Because when you have those situations exist, and when those bills sent from the Assembly straight to the President, and the President approved them without the People's House approval, that bill or those bills could end up in court, and they have a lot of time wasting, whereas these situations should be remedied here or during these stages. My recommendation is to say that upon the approval of both houses of Parliament in Tobago, or the Tobago legislation, the bill sent for assent to the President, after which time he will approve it. Another area that I am concerned with is there's no fixed time for proclamation of this bill, and after the bill have been approved, the proclamation could take 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 10 years. I think a time frame should be sent, a proclamation time should be established, whereby the bill come into operation. So the expedient of the island or for the functioning of the government. And one final note is that the Tobago, given the powers to make laws, there should be the parameters should be included more areas of lawmaking aspect. For instance, Tobago should be given on foreign affairs issues. Tobago should have the...
Mr. James, before you go down that road, once there is the state of Trinidad and Tobago, Tobago can't make its own foreign affairs issues. It's just like in the United States, the state of Texas can't have separate foreign affairs issues than the nation's state. Okay? So in terms of foreign affairs, once it is a unitary state, that cannot happen. It's one foreign policy.
But what could be done in the event of conflict of laws? The Constitution would say which law prevails, whether the Assembly law or the national law. My final point is that in making the laws for Tobago, there should be the creation of an office similar to that of the Attorney General, like a master attorney section, where you have an office set up for the creation of the laws. Okay?
Thank you very kindly, Mr. James.
Thank you very much.
Are there any questions from any member? Okay, thank you very kindly.
Okay.
Sir, you're next.
Good afternoon, everyone, Madam Chair and other members. My name is Ronald Rodney. I am from WIM, and I just want to make a personal contribution. I've been hearing about self-government for quite a while now, a long time now, you know, and I didn't get a chance to look at the process, but yesterday I went and looked at some of the models, and I looked at New Zealand, because they were self-governed before they came into independence. And one of the questions that the Prime Minister had was, what was the difference between self-governed and being independent? And then they were also looked at some of the problems that they have. I mean, if we go down the road for self-government, we have to look at how people solve their problems. And one of the problems that they had was with the officials that were elected were misusing their power. And I think we are talking about having a president to represent us as being self-governed. And that president will then be choosing people to represent. And I think that there should be some mandate as to how these people are being chosen, and not just by the president. That's one point I want to make. The next point is that if Tobago is to become self-governed, we still have a lot of dependency on Trinidad. And no leeway is being made for Tobago to provide for themselves. And I know someone spoke earlier about teaching to fish, but we reached a point where it's almost like studio charity. I'm not talking about Trinidad giving us. I'm talking about us not being able to provide an economy to develop ourselves. I know Dr. Mahabir said that Trinidad economy is growing, but I can't see how we can grow if we don't have things like cement factory. If we have a tragedy here in Tobago, Tobago is closed down. We don't have a storehouse for diesel and all these things like that. These are the things that we need to have in Tobago before we talk about self-government. And we need to have something mandated so we have those things to rely on instead of having to go to Trinidad. And that is basically around my, what I want to contribute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rodney.
Yeah.
Member Mahab.
I know it is late. Thank you, Madam Chair, for indulging me. But Mr. Rodney raised a very valuable point, and that is with respect to the appointment of persons in the People's House. You said the president should somehow be circumscribed.
Yeah.
Do you have any objection to the following, where the President of the Republic, as he or she can, according to the Constitution, appoint 9 distinguished persons to serve in the Senate, that the President can appoint a number to serve in the People's House in Tobago, but after taking advice from the elected representatives with respect to whether they have any objections to these people, so that there could be some local content to inform the decisions of the President, though she or he would still be guided by having to choose persons who, in the opinion of Tobagonians, have made a contribution significant contribution in one form or the other to the development of Tobago society, but that it ought to be that the president sitting in Port of Spain should have some local knowledge to inform her decision, and that local knowledge may be based upon any objections the elected representatives in Tobago may have with respect to those appointed people who would be on the chamber. Do you think that would work and that would be acceptable to you and other people in Tobago?
Well, I think that the culture of Tobago is, I think we have like 60,000 people here in Tobago, and it's almost like everybody know everybody. And that would be a problem. I think we have to have some kind of mandate where we have people who don't have any frame of reference to who is going to be chosen or why the person is to be chosen. And if something like that could be set up, where it's not counteractive to say, and I know this person, I favor this person or whatnot, then I think that would work.
Yeah, very well. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Rodney, we'll have to bring Trinidadians.
I really don't. Right now, I think that if I may.
Mr. Rodney, that was just.
Yeah, I understand. I understand.
You don't need to respond.
No, I understand what you're saying. But I think that Tobago should not come to a place where we have to continue holding on to the skirtail of Trinidad. And I think the only way we can do that is to have our own industries here. And I don't think anyone is making a ploy to do that. If we don't have industries here, we will be continue begging Trinidad, and we will not become economically stable. And I think that's the thing, that's where we need to go.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Rodney. And Mr. Rodney is our last contributor. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who has come out, whether you've actually made a contribution before us or not. It clearly shows the interest of all of you who are here and those persons who are looking at us on the television or listening to us on the radio. I'd like to specifically thank Mr. Richards, Mr. Hector, Mr. Arthur, Ms. Almandoz, Dr. James, Mr. Lewis, Mr. Taylor, Mr. Drysdale, Mr. Benjamin, Mr. Vidal, Mr. James, and Mr. Rodney, who came forward and made their contributions. Thank you very kindly. Please remember that you can still submit your contributions to the following email address: tobagoselfgov@ttparliament.org. Thank you very kindly. I'd also like to thank the members of the Tobago Self-Government Joint Select Committee, the committee members, for being here today, and the members of staff of the Parliament, and the members of the Attorney General's office and the CPC's office. Thank you very kindly. I cannot say at this time exactly when we will be back, but the intention is to return to Tobago to have further discussions. So I look forward to us meeting again. And again, I say thank you very kindly for your deep interest. Thank you.